Think about the next generation and think if any of these things, I need to put my glasses on so I can see, describe a generation that you're familiar with. They are unpredictable. They are slackers. They are wanderers, loners, not team players, quitters, complainers, have a lack of motivation, a lack of common sense, and they're impatient. Does that sound like the next generation to you? Well, guess what? That came out of a book that was written in 1998. It was the chapter titles for Gen X, which happens to be the generation I fall in. So, we often see negatives in generations, but like Dr. Lance said in his prayer, we know that they've got a lot to offer. We know that these next generations, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, have a whole lot to offer us. So we do want to get to know them better and to know about what will help reach them for the gospel so that we can allow them to come to know their Lord and Savior and grow closer to Him. One of my responsibilities here is a program called Bible Drill. I do all things kids ministry except Vacation Bible School and preschool, and I'll introduce you to that person later this afternoon. But a couple of years ago, we had our national Bible drill, which I know many of y'all may not know exists, but it does. We had it at Dallas Baptist University. And at that time, I had the opportunity to meet Shelly. And I came back and said, y'all, we have to have her here. We really need to have her here. And over the past 3 years at Children's Pastors Conference, at ETCH Conference, I've gotten to see her and be in her conferences. And she's phenomenal. She shares information in a wonderful way. You are going to learn so much. She is on staff at Dallas Baptist University now. She works in the children's ministry area. I think you're the director of that. And she is a former children and preschool minister. So I know that you are going to learn so much, and you're going to fall in love with her like all of us that have seen her and heard her speak before. So I know that it's going to be a day that you're filled with many blessings from hearing from her. Before we get started, you have a little candy bar in case you get hungry at your spot today. And on the back of it, I want to share some verses that I think are appropriate for today. Now, to Him who is able to do above and beyond all that we seek or ask or think accordingly to the power that works in us, to Him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations. Ephesians 3:20 and 21. So let's give a warm Alabama welcome to Shelly.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you. I do work at Dallas Baptist University, but probably the most important thing is that I have 3 kids, and they're all 3 Gen Zers. And so I am in the same boat you all are in the sense that I'm curious, and I'm wanting to learn about them because they do think so differently, and they are definitely my pride and joy. But thank you for allowing me. This is a great opportunity just to be here for so long and to get to speak. Just a fun thing, and I think Belinda hit upon it, essentially, is that things that are written about these generations have been written about other generations, right? Because every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one before. And if we're really honest, we thought we knew more than we did, too, when we were young. And Thomas Jefferson said, every generation needs a revolution, right? Did you know he said that? And so what our kids are going through and some of the things that we're thinking about are pretty normal. I'm going to show you several books in case some of you like to read. This is a book called Gentelligence. It's about generation intelligence. And in the very beginning of the book, he kind of hits home this point that back in 2007, Morley Safer said, a new breed of American workers is about to attack everything you hold sacred, from giving orders to your starched white shirt and tie. These are called, among other things, millennials. And, that kind of points back to when some of the division between generations happened, right? Millennials, how many of y'all are millennials? You guys got the worst rap ever for so many years. There was so much ink dropped on you, and I'm Gen X as well as Belinda and some of you, and we're like the middle child between boomers and millennials, and we've just been largely ignored. There's just not a lot written about us. But there are some things that we want to learn because another book that I've read talks about just how important generational issues are to the church. this particular author goes and says it's the largest challenge that churches face. And those experiences that we have in our generations do influence what we emphasize. Who we are and what we have been through often will come out in the things that we think are important in ministry. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm the one causing the sound. Am I causing it? Okay. So sorry. And so generation intelligence is just understanding the basic facts. It's looking out the window and seeing what the topography looks like, and that's what we're going to do. I want to share some of the texts that some of you may be interested in reading if you like generational studies. But Generations is a new book by Jean Twang. She wrote iGen, which is a very famous book that came out that talked about technology and how that impacted kids. The Great De-Churching. Has anybody read that in the room? Okay. So very interesting book, and we'll pull some things from that as well. There's a brand new book coming out in March, The Anxious Generation. This is by Jonathan Haidt. And in my presentation, there's a link to a hour-long thing that he gave that obviously we're not going to play today. But this is really, I've got it ordered. It's going to hit me as soon as it hits Amazon, right? And so we've got some information from that. A couple of books that are secular, and actually some of those are secular as well. I think I just lost, there we go. Okay. The Coddling of the American Mind. Has anybody read that? Okay. Fascinating book. They just came out with the canceling of the American mind. And so these are secular writers who are saying things that make a whole lot of sense, right? And they're things that we can even learn from in ministry. But let's do a little generational review. Let's do a very high-tech poll. Are y'all ready for a poll? So put your pen down and scoot your chair out, and we're going to find out who's in this room. All right? So we have traditionalists. They were born before 1945. If you're a traditionalist, stand up. We want to see our traditionalists. No ashamed of age. No traditionalists? Okay. All right. Boomers. Stand up, boomers. All right. Very nice. Okay. Very good. Generation X. You can sit down, boomers. Where are my Xers? You guys are my people. Look at that. Wow. For the people that don't get talked about a lot. Do you want to try this? Okay. Okay. All right. Are we there? Can you hear me? 1, 2, there we go. Okay, Gen X, I love you all. You are my people. How about millennials? A good number of millennials as well. All right. And then Gen Zers. We got a few Gen Zers. Okay, perfect. Very good. All right, have a seat. So, Gen Alpha, there's nobody here that's less than 14, right? But they're the newest kids on the block, and we're going to talk a lot about them eventually. But just for fun, let's think about traditionalists, and let's think about some of the things that we know about them. Their mantra might be something like, we've been through tough times before, right? They are very loyal to institutions and corporations and churches. They are the people that we are really worried about because they have held up the church for so long, right? And in preschool and children's ministry, we are struggling because we've lost so many of them. They went through the Great Depression and World War II, and here might be some music for them, right? They had the big band music. Anybody love the big band music, right? So those are our traditionalists. Baby boomers. I mean, we're just going to fly through the first 2 or 3 of these, and then we'll really spend some time on the other ones. Baby boomers. One of the things that you'll find in the literature is a shift from collectivism to individualism. And several of the writers are saying that really in the boomer generation is when that started to shift. And now we have a full-on hyper-individualism culture in Gen Z and in Gen Alpha. But John F. Kennedy being shot, the Vietnam War, we could all reminisce about some of those things. But some of the music they listen to, yeah. I can see the movement from some of you guys. You remember that. Good old Elvis. Generation X, my favorite. Schoolhouse Rock. Anybody remember Schoolhouse Rock? Oh, yeah. Conjunction Function or whatever that was. We grew up with Saturday morning cartoons, and that's the only time you watch cartoons, right? We also had a phone that if you wanted privacy, you had to have a long cord, and you would go all the way to your bedroom. And we were latchkey kids. We were the first latchkey kids. We were the first generation where there was a lot of parental divorce. And probably when I ask people, one of the big remembrances is the Challenger disaster. I was in the media center, the library at our school. We were all watching the teacher, and it happened right before our eyes, and that's a memory. And maybe you remember this song, right? How many of you guys stayed up late to watch this when it came out on MTV? Yeah? My parents wouldn't let me watch MTV, so I went to my friend Leslie's house. And we watched Thriller come out on MTV. But we're the last generation to have mostly analog childhood. Right? I had a phone in college, and it was a bag phone, and it was 20 minutes for emergencies only. So we were the last kids. We rode in the back of pickup trucks, on lawn chairs, and didn't wear helmets. And we are all those memes about how we survived despite being protected. And then we moved to millennials. And again, I feel like they've got the worst rap recently. But their big event was obviously 9/11. And we all remember that very, very well. And they got a song written about them. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but some of you guys have heard this. Ding, 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 ding.
There he sits inside your local coffee shop, sporting a man bun and facial hair. Somehow he believes, although he has no job, that by his 30s he will be a millionaire. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A-L, gotta love millennials. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A.
I'm going to stop it right before it becomes an earworm for you. But that's a fun song, right? And a really bad rap. But we could spend time talking about some of the passions of millennials because they're really powerful, some of the things that they are doing. I always mention fostering and adopting because I think that's one of those things that they inspire me about. But when you look at some of the statistics, Barna just put out this statistic right here, and you can see that weekly church attendance by generation, who is the highest in 2022? Millennials. Yeah, millennials, according to some of the data, have come back to church in greater numbers than any other generation, and boomers have come back less. Maybe different in your church, every church is different, but according to the statistics, these are the generations, this is the percentage that have come back and that are attending church. There's Kerry Newhoff, I know you guys read on him. He's written some things about millennial pastors and how they're shifting and they're changing and they're a little bit different. And he says that they're less interested. Not all of them, we're painting broad brush strokes here, but they're less interested in popularity and platform and more interested in local ministry, which I think is also characteristic of Gen Zers. The ones that live in my house want to do things outside of the church in local ministry. That they lead less from a top down and more from consensus building. That's a positive shift that some are seeing. And that they're less fixated on size and more fixated on growth. And so as we see millennials step into those very senior pastors' positions, those are some of the trends that they're seeing. In this particular book, the driving force of generational change, according to Twang, is technology. And if you think about how much technology has changed us, there's a couple of things that she really emphasizes, and that is individualism as opposed to collectivism. And individualism, technology allows us to, for instance, you all to look on your phone and see what I'm doing. It allows us on an airplane to watch 50 different things, right? It allows us to do things that technology has never afforded us before. And the problem with that is that collectivism is really a scriptural thing, right? Being a part of a greater good, being a part of a body of Christ, that idea of collectivism that our traditionalists gave us has taken a back seat to individualism. And then she also talks about a slow life as opposed to a fast life. And what she says is that our kids are growing up in a slow life. Now, it doesn't mean that things aren't going 100 miles an hour, but what it means is that they're slower to take responsibility, slower to get their driver's license, slower to grow up emotionally, as opposed to, latchkey kids. What did we have to? We had to grow up pretty fast. We had to learn how to unlock the door and do all those things that we had to do. And of course, traditionalists had to do a lot more than that, right? But our kids are, they're being treated like they're older in the sense of the things they're exposed to, but they're not being expected to be older. And so she points out some of those things. And so as we think about Next Gen Ministries, here's what we're focusing on. We're really focusing on 0 to 28-year-olds. That's what would fit the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha age group. And so as you're thinking about what we're talking about, and we're going to break it down into really a couple of big buckets, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but these are the people that are in your churches, that are in your Next Gen Ministries. And Tim Elmore is a great writer. He's written a lot of different books, and he says that we let them risk too little, we rescue them too quickly, and we rave too easily. And that's kind of one of those, that's kind of the environment that they've grown up in. I recommend Tim Elmore very highly if you're looking for information on generations. So now that we've kind of reviewed, let's really sort of zero in for the next few hours on the generations of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So Gen Z is 1996 to 2010. They were in their teenage years, most of them, young adult years, when we went through COVID, and that was a big deal. And one of the statements that Elmore talks about in his book is they feel postponed and penalized. Weddings were postponed, graduations were changed, all of those different things that happened to them, and they've grown up in a world where there's the Me Too and Church Too movement, where they're seeing scandal all the time, and those are our Gen Zers. And Tim Elmore, in his book, The Pandemic Population, he talked about music and how music is often a reflection of generations. And he pulled out some music, and I want to share a couple of those songs with you that he pulled out that are a little bit, I think, reflective of how Gen Z feels at times. Again, these are broad brush strokes. You would hope that Christian Gen Zers are going to feel different. And there is a word in this song that you and I wouldn't use, but I want to play it for you. I'm not going to play the whole thing for you, but this is called Let's Stay in Our Pajamas, okay? Think about that as an approach to difficulty in life. So, that's not a real upbeat song, right? But that's a song that Tim Elmore points out, and I think it makes some good points. There is some pessimism. There was some pessimism at times, and you got to be honest. I have Gen Zers. It's a terrible time to try to buy a house, to try to get ahead financially. I mean, who can afford the economy that our kids have inherited? And so you can see where some of that might come from, but as we think about this generation, I think there's some things that we want to be aware of. And one of the next gen challenges for our Gen Z is definitely mental health. In 2021, a national emergency was declared by the American Academy of Pediatrics and several professional organizations that saying that mental health is a national emergency for our kids. And so if you think about statistics much, or if you watch much, you know that all of these things are going up, right? Anxiety, depression, suicide, loneliness, and in particular, in boys, depression has increased by 161% since 2010. Now, girls are still dealing with it at a higher level, but if you can just imagine how much of an increase that we've seen in boys, there's a higher rate of suicide among boys, and that 10 to 15 12-year-old population is one of the faster growing areas for that. And so one of the comments by an article that I read that said that there's a higher rate of boys withdrawing from the real world and engaged in the virtual world. And that's kind of a mic drop statement, right? Is that as they withdraw from the real world and as they engage in the virtual world, that's when their mental health goes down. And what we're seeing is more and more of that. If you wanted to watch a movie, that's not something you would watch with your kids probably, but you wanted to watch a movie that sort of depicted Gen Z, Dear Evan Hansen, in my opinion, would be that movie. And I want to share a song from there that just talks about the loneliness of that generation. I won't play the whole thing, but how many of y'all have seen Dear Evan Hansen? Yeah, okay. If you haven't, again, it's not something, it's not going to have a Christian message to it, but it is going to give you this view maybe of how they feel. But here's a song called You Will Be Found.
Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Well, let that lonely feeling wash away. Maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. 'Cause when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. And oh, someone will come running, and I know they'll take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found.
Okay, so you need to watch that movie to get the full impact, but that's one of the most important scenes in that movie is this young man wanting to be found, wanting to know that when he falls, somebody's going to notice, right? And so music often sort of paints a picture of what's going on in our kids' life. But as we think about anxiety and as we think about why are our kids so anxious, I think as I've been thinking the past few days, we are wired for connection, and technology is disconnecting us, right? And so as we have slipped into the virtual world, we have stepped away from the real world, and our kids are suffering from it. Some of the reasons that I think, and there's many other, is that they live in a world where there's constant comparison. They are constantly comparing themselves to what they see on social media. They know when they're not at the party that everybody else is at. They know when their friend who told them they couldn't go to the movies with them is at the mall with somebody else, right? They constantly are comparing, and by the way, we are too as adults. As parents, we're constantly comparing. And God doesn't compare his creation, does he? He doesn't want us to compare creation. And so I have to struggle with that because, my kids are great kids, but they're not NASA scientists. They're not NFL heroes. They're just good kids. But when I look at everybody else's kids, I can sometimes feel inadequate, right? They have a peer reference. They are just sitting around looking at each other all the time through technology. Does that make sense? Even at church, they have a peer reference. They're not being exposed. I don't think in some of your churches are different, but they're not being exposed to some of you all traditionalists, boomers, who really need to speak into them about what it means to suffer and to still love Jesus, right? They're just looking at each other. They're just taking cues from each other about politics, about gender identity, about all of those things. They are looking at each other constantly. Some of them have imposter syndrome because we know what's really true. At the end of the day, we know whether our mom made something happen or we made something happen, right? And so I think that sometimes our kids struggle because they know, too, that what they're saying is going on in their life, how they're filtering it, is not really how they feel. And so they feel sort of this constant imposter syndrome. They have some deficiencies in agency and grit. So agency is this idea that I can actually do something about my problems, that I have the ability to solve problems. And grit is passion and perseverance, right? And so when we at DBU see students show up and they have that low agency and that low grit, even if they've been successful in high school, sometimes they wipe out at college because they've never really bumped up against something that they've had to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and make happen. And so that creates a lot of stress, and it's a challenge for us in higher education to teach them that grit. Because in many ways, as parents, we robbed them of that. Because we took away anything that was challenging. We took away anything that might make us even feel inadequate, and we fixed things for them. And so they didn't really learn who they were in the tough times because we didn't let them have tough times. I'll give you an example. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a student, our dean, had a student that said, "Hey, I want to meet with you." She had an issue in a class. And so he said, sure, and got an appointment. And a couple of days before she was supposed to come, he found out mom's coming with her. And so he's like, okay, this is interesting. I mean, we love moms and dads, but this is not common. And so mom showed up, and the daughter she had an agenda, and she began going through it. And Brent was like, she was doing a good job, and we were talking through it, and I was explaining to her, why that wouldn't work, but what we could do. And she said, then the mom just reached over and took her agenda and took over the meeting and was nice, but began to try to solve the problem for the daughter. And the message that sent to the daughter was what? You can't handle this. Let me take care of it for you. So unintentionally, good intentions. Parents love their kids, there's no doubt. But unintentionally, we have sent the message here, you can't handle that, let me handle it for you. And so that's why I think our kids are struggling in some of those ways. They have information burden, so much information. My sister had a medical test the other day, and she said, I'm not even going to Google it because she got the results back. And I said, well, I'm not either. Because I've learned not to Google those things. Why? Because it stresses me out, and it makes me worry about things that I don't need to worry about yet. So if you think about our kids, they've got the ability to Google everything. When I was growing up, if I got a bad grade, I didn't find out it till when. I got in the mail. I got the grade in the mail. Right? My parents didn't know when I was struggling. Not that that's a bad thing. I think it's good that parents know. But today, parents know before the kids get home what they just got on the quiz at school. And for me, I have 3 kids, 2 great students, 1 risk taker, just loves to have fun. School's not a big deal. That before he even got home, what was I? I was mad at him. And I had 3 questions about this quiz that da-da-da-da-da. That is a burden. It doesn't give kids an opportunity to learn from their mistakes as they go. Some of you all are looking at your retirement every single day because you can. You can look at that account. Think of the burden that is. Wasn't it nicer when we just know quarterly whether it was going up or down? So that's where anxiety, I think, comes from. Performance burnout. We're more concerned, if we're honest, at times about our kids' performance than their character. Because performance will get clicks, right? Performance gets attention. And again, well-intentioned. I'm guilty of all these things. But they are tired of the performance trap. They have relational poverty. And you would think with all the technology and the ways that they're connected that this wouldn't be true. But this is the absolute truth. Our kids don't have good, strong relationships. And they're growing up without those connections. And they're growing up without those even in the church. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, which all of those things create spiritual formation delays because they're not in our churches as much as well. And so anxiety is a real thing. And I think it's hard for some of us to understand because maybe that wasn't what we dealt with. But it absolutely is an issue that our kids are dealing with. So those macro trends, those big picture trends that we can kind of keep fleshing out, the look out the window, there are some things that these kids in our Gen Alpha have grown up with. They have an external locus of control. This relates to agency too. But an external locus of control says, I don't really have control over much. And it's just kind of hopeless. It's that let's just stay in our pajamas type of a mindset, that there are too many forces that prevent me from really having what people would say would be a good thing. And we'll take it a step further as Christians, but internal locus of control means there's something within me that I can do when bad things happen and I can work things out. It's that agency taken a little bit further. So our world, psychologists, counselors, would emphasize internal locus of control, that kids who are resilient have an internal locus of control. When they have something hit them, they think, how am I going to solve this? Okay, this is what I need to do. And they feel as though they have a way to solve it. Now, we know that what we really want kids to know is an eternal locus of control, right? So I get the internal is a little bit secular. We would want it to be more of an eternal that says, you know, this really stinks, but I know that God is with me. I know that he works for good, and I can work through this, and I can get through it. They've also had decreased independent play, and this is a big deal. The Anxious Generation book is a lot about the reduction of independent play and the joy and the happiness that happens in kids. And not only that they learn to solve problems, that they bump up against each other, and they learn empathy in ways that you can't learn through a video game, right? And so they've had less of that. They've been cyber socialized. They get together and they break up all on a phone, right? They learn how to treat each other, or they have learned how to treat each other through technology. And if we look at Twitter and all those places, we know that we're not teaching them well about how to treat each other. They have that hyper individualism is part of that topography that they're growing up in, where it's all about me, right? It's all about individualizing everything. They are growing up in a polarized and tribal world, and I don't know that we really even understand how different that is than the way some of us grew up, where you are either for me or you're against me is the mantra. And that coddling of the American mind talks a lot about that. It talks about 3 untruths that we're teaching our kids, and that's one of them, is that it's an us versus them world. And so they're growing up in that. They're not seeing people be able to relate to each other in positive ways. If you watch The Social Dilemma, anybody watch The Social Dilemma? Okay, so you know that that's a powerful documentary. And it talks about one of the greatest issues that they feel is facing next gen is an absence of shared truth. An absence of shared truth. When we can't agree on anything, these secular people say, that's when our society is in deep trouble. And so our kids aren't growing up knowing that there is absolute truth. We hope that's different in the church, but even some of our church kids have those same beliefs. They're also growing up in a time of ideological intolerance. And I think that's going to become more and more evident in the election season, right? But that goes back to the coddling of the American mind. You're either with me or you're against me. You're either my friend or you're my foe. There's a video here by Jonathan Haidt that if you want the PowerPoint, you'll be able to watch. It's that hour-long one about the anxious generation. And so you might ask for that. But here's a few more things. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. That's a mic dropper. We have no idea how that's going to fully impact our next gen folks. And Kevin Kelly says, our smart technology is advancing so quickly it outpaces our ability to civilize it. Right? At DBU, we've had to write a policy about AI. You know, we have, I mean, we could spend a whole conference on AI and how it's going to change our kids. But artificial intelligence. Dehumanization, pornography has dehumanized us, right? We're just objects to many. They're growing up in that culture. Feelings are given ultimate authority. Okay? Feelings are given ultimate authority. And there is this sense of transhumanism, that the body is just stuff. So Carl Trueman talks about this, and he says, here's why we have what we have going on right now with the transgender and all of those things. He said, we have a society, a culture that's built on feelings, and that has empowered us to make decisions based on feelings, while at the same time we have technology that we've never had before that allows us to act on those feelings and to change things. And it's that combination of those two things, that hyper-individualism, all about feelings, with technology that we've never had before, that creates this culture where the body is just stuff and we can change it. And our kids are being immersed in that and growing up in it. We also have, we're sort of in a confirmation bias culture where if you watched the documentary, The Social Dilemma, the algorithms in our computers know what we like to look at. And we're living in an economy of attention. Let me say that again. We're living in an economy of attention, meaning what they want is our attention. We are the product. And the way that they get our attention is to put things on our news feed that we're already thinking about or that we already believe. So something that I say today will end up being on your news feed, right? There'll be an ad for it. It's very interesting. But what the Social Dilemma guy said is literally when you Google, for instance, they give the example of climate change. So if I Google climate change I'm going to get a different result than you when you Google climate change than is somebody who is about climate change. Does that make sense? So it's feeding you back the things that you already believe because that will keep your attention, and attention is how they make money. So we live in a world where we're in a crisis of spiritual formation because we live in an attention economy. Attention is money, you are the product. That comes from the great de-churching. And so our kids are growing up in that world. So now that we're all depressed, maybe a little bit overwhelmed, just for 2 or 3 minutes, I want you to turn to your neighbor, and I want you to talk about what's the most startling thing you just heard, and what's the so what. How do you think that applies to what you're trying to do in your ministries? And I'll just give you a few minutes. Okay, if you can start to wind it down. I hope that your thoughts are, I hope your brain hurts a little bit. Let me just be honest. I think disequilibrium is good for us, right? To be knocked off a little bit of our pedestal, maybe, to think about some of the things is good for us. That's how we learn, is thinking differently, is considering things in a different way. As we move throughout the day, we're going to do more of that, turning and talking, but I'm still just trying to fire hydrant some information to you for the moment. And so we've got 2 or 3 more slides that we're going to break, and then we'll come back and do some more stuff. Another book by Michelle Boba called Thrivers. She interviewed a lot of our Gen Zers, and these are some of the things that they said. We are college and career ready, but we sure aren't human ready. We lack passion because everything is pushed on us, so we don't know who we are. That's that performance mindset. We may look good on the outside, but we're not so good inside. We're kind of lost. We need time to be kids and have friends. Our generation always focuses on trying to make everything picture perfect, so we're drained. Michelle Boba. Another book that just came out. This is a secular book, but it's called Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About. For today's kids, it's less about measuring up and more about measuring over. It's not good enough just to measure up. You've got to be over what everybody else is. Everyone needs to stand out from the crowd. Empathy is markedly lower in generations. And there's been some studies on that, and some of you probably know those things, and you may even have some ideas about it. But that lack of independent play and more technology, more and more video games has decreased, according to some of the studies, the empathy. And I will have parents often say, well, but I know that my kids make friends on their video games. I know that they're connected to people all over the world. And the difference is, and what I try to say very nicely, is the difference is when I'm on the playground and I knock over a kid, or I'm playing baseball and I knock over a kid and I see them cry, that impacts me differently than just shooting them or doing whatever else we do on a video game. And that empathy is actually what we try to teach in preschool, isn't it, my preschool friends? We're trying to help them see, how do you think that felt? Joy, would you tell them how it felt for you to push them down? You know, we're trying to teach empathy, and empathy happens person to person. It doesn't happen on a worksheet. It doesn't happen from a stage. It doesn't happen in a video game. Empathy has to happen person to person. And that's one of those things that our kids are dealing with. And there, according to this author, there is a narcissism epidemic because we're only thinking about ourselves because we have to stand out. We have to measure over. And so we've inadvertently often become narcissists. The last thing from this particular book is this statement from Aiden. But he says, the puzzle is us. We're trying to fit into the world, but we can't because we're missing pieces. What pieces are missing? The pieces on how to be people, like how to get along, to handle mistakes, to cope with stress, that kind of stuff. Pieces that build your character and make you human. But we're being raised to be just products, so we all feel empty. So that performance mindset, that's going to trickle into the church because they're going to be averse to that, right? And we'll talk about that later. They don't want the performance. They want to be real. And anxiety at its root is worrying about things that aren't happening right now. And technology takes us away from right now. We are forever elsewhere. I'm a counselor as well, and so one of the coping mechanisms for anxiety is to ground. It's what's called grounding. It's where you're trying to bring that person back to the present. To maybe you tell them to breathe deeply and you do the breathing squares, or maybe it's tell me 3 things you see that are red, or 3 things that smell good to you, or whatever. It's trying to bring a person to reality, to the present. And technology is taking us away from where we are presently. Does that make sense? So part of our challenge is to be present, to be present with kids, and also to create environments where kids are present with each other. And when we come back, we're going to watch a video from a college kid, and he's going to talk about some of this, okay? So let's take a break. It is 10:55. If we can start back at 11:05, is that okay? All right.
A couple of things I wanted to let you know. You will receive an email with the PowerPoint that Shelly is doing today, as well as the audio of the recorded session as well. So I know that if you're like me, you're like writing as fast as you can and might have missed a few of those little blanks. So you will get that. So our communications department will be sending that to you. So be looking for that. And if for chance you have a problem with that, you may email me. It's bstroud@alsbaum.org. My email address is on the Kids Link website. And please know that you may email about anything children's ministry. Would love to help you. And I do want you to look at that website. We have a lot of free resources for you on it. So take advantage of those. And if you have questions about those, we'll be happy to answer those. I did want to introduce our Office of Discipleship and Sunday School introduce himself just quickly so that you will know who they are.
You don't put a microphone in our hands and not expect us to do a pitch. I am Patty Burns, and I am the preschool specialist and VBS promoter for Alabama, and VBS is well underway right now. So if I could just do a little commercial. These cards are on the back table where the snacks are. These have the dates for 3 VBS live training events. We are going to equip you the best way we know how in Vacation Bible School. And if you haven't decided what Vacation Bible School you're going to do, this theme today fits perfectly with Breaker Rock Beach Lifeway's 2024 event. Shelly made the statement, absence of shared truth. The first day of Vacation Bible School, we're going to talk about, some people say truth can be different for different people, but God says truth comes from me. If you haven't chosen a Bible school yet, look at that and then come see us and we'll equip you.
I am Mark Gainey. So I'm here actually as a pastor today. So I pastor Fultondale First Baptist just north of Birmingham. But I'm also a state missionary. I serve in this office as the role of lead strategist for disciple making. And so what we're talking about today is right in my wheelhouse. I love it because everything that we're talking about is really related to discipleship and training them up. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested, we have a disciple making event every year. It's the State Disciple Making Conference, and it's April 22nd this year, and it's at our church at Fultondale First Baptist. Just Google Alabama Disciple Making Conference. You'll find it, and it's free. Encourage you to register. We'd love to see you there.
I'm Daniel Edmonds. I'm director of the Office of Sunday School and Discipleship, and Mark and I are both at a deficit. We don't have a publicity piece to hand out, but I'll give some free publicity for Mark. His book, Disciple Making Toolbox, drops at Amazon on Monday. And so I want to encourage you to check that out. I've read it from cover to cover. It will be well worth your time. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Shelly.
Okay, great. Hooray, hooray. So it's a small world. Sandy right here, I think you babysat me some. Her dad was my pastor growing up. Her mom taught me piano. Sports took over my life about 6th grade, so I didn't get the full benefit. Sandy's an amazing pianist, but isn't it cool when you have a blast from your past? But Sandy and her family were Sonia. I loved Sonia. And so it's cool. You know, relationships are the spice of life, aren't they? They're what makes us tick. I want to let you watch a video. This is from Sean Killingsworth. He's a college student who has noticed some things, and you've got some sound bites from it, I believe. Let me see. Did I include that? Maybe not. You don't have sound bites. So make some notes as you listen to this guy. I think it will resonate with us today.
When I was little, I grew up in a small neighborhood with a bunch of boys. And after we finished homeschool for the day, we rode our bikes around, went fishing, swimming, climbing trees, and any other fun thing a kid does outside. When I was 8, we went to an after-school program 2 days a week. And I was excited to play with all the other kids. But no one was playing. They were all playing on their Game Boy. and everyone had one except me. It didn't matter what I tried. No kid wanted to play when they had their own personal screen. This was my first experience with the isolation devices create. As I got older, I wanted to have adventures, go explore. But everyone's heads were still down. And instead of Pokemon on a Game Boy, it was Instagram and Snapchat on a smartphone. I was 13 when I started to feel real grief. I had no idea what, but I knew something was gone. Okay, so here's the part where this could turn into another talk about how kids should get their face out of their phones, go outside, and talk to people. That's already been said so many times, and it's having no effect. It's because it misses the real problem. The real problem is that an entire ecosystem has been lost. Let me help you understand what I mean by that. Imagine a herd of antelope roaming and grazing the grass of a beautiful savanna. As they roam, they're contributing to their own ecosystem. Now imagine someone introduced feed bins. The antelope stay near the bins. They no longer have to roam and graze the savanna. All the animals stop roaming, creating an unnatural order. Over time, the entire ecosystem of the savanna becomes an unrecognizable wasteland. I've heard my parents tell stories of the savanna. Teenagers roaming the mall, hanging out at the arcade, going on dates. If they wanted to connect with someone, they had to go see them. They were forced out of their house, past their insecurities, and into the wild. There was no other option. And so they did. Everyone did. That was normal. That healthy ecosystem encouraged real connection. Okay, I want you to really understand what I'm saying. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to bring up some of your favorite memories as a teenager with your friends. All the times you hung out, the mall, the dumb stuff you did together. Put yourself back in those memories. Okay, now put those images in a line. Now delete the first one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Okay, open your eyes. Imagine the landscape of your memories as a teenager without any of that. It's a bit of a wasteland, isn't it? The ecosystem for those experiences doesn't exist anymore. And it's worse than that. Remember all those immature moments you had as a teenager? Those moments are meant to evaporate. Now they're permanent. Because of that, we live under constant scrutiny. We don't get the luxury of just being an immature teenager. We have to watch everything we do and say. Anything can be captured and made permanent. This creates an unsustainable level of anxiety and unnatural pressure. Teenagers judging each other and being insecure is normal and natural, and we can deal with it if the moments evaporate like they're meant to, but they don't. We're anxious because we have to constantly sleep with one eye open in this wasteland. I'll never forget the morning at school I decided to notice. The girl walking next to me, on her phone. Every kid sitting on a bench lining the courtyard, on their phones. I only saw 3 kids not on their phone. These devices aren't connecting us. They're isolating us next to each other. I knew I needed to make a change. I thought I'd just not go on my phone as much. I deleted Snapchat, added it back. Deleted social media, added it back. I charged my phone outside my room, then I just charged it in my room and be back where I started. Trying to change my behavior was exhausting. Then it hit me. I'm the kid sucked into the Game Boy. If there was no Game Boy, we would have all played together. That's when I decided to get rid of my smartphone completely. So at 15, I got a flip phone and became isolated in a completely different way. There were times when I felt like there was no winning. I made all the changes. I put down my phone. I tried to talk to people. I spent time off social media. But because everyone else was still sucked in, and I do mean everyone, it didn't matter what I did. I was just back to being the only kid without a Game Boy. If we're not careful here, you could miss the whole point of this talk. So listen closely. Kids are lonely, not only because we won't put away our phones, but because when we do, there's nothing for us to turn to instead. We don't actually want our phones or social media or Snapchat. What we want is real connection. But that doesn't happen naturally in this new ecosystem. Everything that naturally breeds real connection has been lost. The new ecosystem breeds isolation. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It's human connection. Addiction happens when someone is isolated. We don't want to be addicted. But what choice do we have when we're living isolated, no matter what we do? I know adults are frustrated because kids won't get their faces out of their phones. But I'm inviting you to understand the real problem and to have some compassion for us. Because we're starving in a wasteland while you tell us to get back out there onto a savanna that no longer exists. I'm not here to help you feel good. I'm here to help you feel how bad kids feel. I've learned how to create an oasis in this wasteland. More and more of my friends are joining in. They don't go on their phones when we hang out. They don't record anything for the most part. And for a couple hours, when we hang out at the dock, playing cards, laughing, and telling stories, I imagine the possibility of roaming wild and free.
It's a powerful video. I've got some sound bites for you that I wrote down some of the things that struck me. And I'd like for you just to turn to a person beside you, in front of you, behind you, wherever. Don't be isolated, though. And talk about what you just saw. And maybe even think, what is the implication for church? Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to do that. I'm going to ask some of you guys to share. Some of you that are feeling brave. Somebody share what the brilliant person next to you said that they got from it.
Our group right here pretty much was what this teenager was saying, that the phones, the Game Boys, or whatever they all use, and to them that is their life. That is their friend. I have a granddaughter that, for that very reason, saw what her friends were doing, she was not doing, created extreme anxiety.
Right.
And so we're seeing that they see their parents do it, so they do it, and we've become a society addicted to that. And we are separated from human interaction.
Right. Isolated right next to each other.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, somebody else. What did y'all talk about? What hit you the hardest about that? How many of you are glad that what you did as a teenager wasn't made permanent? Yeah. I'm thinking Sonia and I did some things we're probably glad that weren't made permanent. Is that a personal testimony in the back?
Maybe for the first time ever, implication for the church is our gathering time with our next gen students and kids may be the only opportunity to have real connection.
Yes.
And so that's an opportunity that maybe we've never had because they're not getting anywhere else.
And that's what hit me really hard is when I've been out of local church ministry for 10 years, but 10 to 12 years ago when phones were really hot, and they're still hot, but we were having a discussion, do we let kids bring phones into preteen ministry? And my position at that time was, that's not a battle I really want to fight. They'll read the Bible on the phone. You know, I kind of allowed myself to think, well, that'll be okay. But 12 years later, my thought process, and everybody has to come to their own conviction, is that would not be allowed, that I would want church to be a no phone. Like, what would it be like to have no phones at church? Even for me as an adult, I sit in the balcony, and when I get there early, what am I doing? I'm looking at my phone. When I'm standing up here and y'all are all out there and I'm feeling a little awkward, what do? I look at my phone. It's a coping thing, right? But so I think you're really onto something, that church could be the only place. And what I've noticed is when you do take it away, it's very painful. There's protest. But afterwards, there's this recognition that, that was kind of nice. It's kind of nice not to have that constant. When I go on vacation, I went with my kids skiing a couple weeks ago. Phone was in my pocket for 3 or 4 hours, and we connected. deeper, right? I was able to see God's creation. I wasn't just looking at my phone. I was able to feel and to do things with my kids emotionally that when I'm not distracted, that doesn't happen. So what else? Somebody else had something over here. Yes, sir.
We talked about just the need to create those opportunities, those oasis moments that kids can come together and maybe even incorporate their phone instead of taking it away. Just how do we do this to that it adds to it? We hosted a Super Bowl party for our youth. Some actually watched the game. Some went off and were playing cards. So that just again an opportunity for them to be social.
Right, and I think churches have pulled back on a lot of that social programming. We went through the Simple Church, that era, and all those things, and so I think it is sort of true that our kids don't have that ecosystem at church. They don't have those adults in their lives that we used to have maybe growing up because they aren't in relationship with them. So I think this particular video really speaks to me and would make me reconsider what I'm doing with kids. The closest thing that kids have to no technology is when they play sports. And that's where community is now being built around, is around kids' sports. Because you can't play soccer looking at your phone, right? And so lots of powerful things in this particular video. I hope it's something that you all will talk about maybe even at lunch together. This new book that I was telling you about, one of the main things that they say is there's been a shift from a play-based childhood, all my preschool friends are loving all this emphasis on play, to a phone or technology-based childhood. And this particular guy, Jonathan Haidt, he's trying to introduce legislation where kids can't have phones. And we know that that's a battle, right? But there's enough evidence out there of how detrimental it is that there are people standing up and wanting to say no more of this for our kids because it's so damaging and so hard. Another book that's a great book for Gen Zers is it's by Andrew McPeak, and it's called Ready for Real Life. And there's a lot of good things in there, but the thing that really hit me, and again, I have Gen Zers in my house, and it was when it talked about communication. So older generations, we're just used to top-down communication. We're just used to, the brain dump. Let me open up my brain, kind of what I'm doing today, and let me just dump information into you. Whereas our Gen Zers, they really want to talk about things. They really want to talk through issues. They really want us to listen to them. And the illustration that Andrew McPeak gave was this idea of our communication needs to be more like a two-way radio. So if you think about a two-way radio, what has to happen in order for you to communicate via a two-way radio? You got to have the button pushed, right? What else? What's that? You got to be on the right channel. Good point. There we go. One person talks, one person listens. Would our world be different if we could do that? I see our world a lot like this other picture, though, that we have a megaphone. And we are just shouting at the top of our lungs what we believe and what we think, and we think somehow that's really good communication, right? If we say it a little louder, you'll hear us. If we say it a little harsher, it'll get your attention. And unfortunately, I think even in the church, we can be that way. We can come across as, all I want to do is just tell you what I believe in a loud way. I don't really want to sit down and listen. And listening's hard, and that's scary, and that's risky. But that is how we reach Gen Z, is to say, it's your turn to talk. I'll listen. I want to understand what it is that you're going through. I also expect that when it's my turn to talk, right, that you'll listen to me too. But we have to model that. And so as a church, sometimes we just use, and you might consider, this is a negative way to say it, but big events are kind of like a megaphone, right? When we rely just on big events for things. And we've had to resort to this in many ways in student and children's ministry. Why? Why have we resorted to the big event, big group stuff? Lack of volunteers. It's not because we don't think our kids need something different. It's not because we're not passionate. It's not because we don't love our kids. It's pragmatism, right? We don't have the people. But if you think about what got you to here, what got you to this moment, it probably wasn't a megaphone event. It probably wasn't a person who just pushed information into you. It was probably someone who walked alongside you in life, who talked to you, who listened to you, who helped work through doubts. And so I think this is a powerful imagery to say, how do we communicate to Gen Z that two-way radio where we do want to hear what you have to say? We do want to listen. We still have our convictions. We're still going to hold to our biblical truth. But we can't just approach it like it's a megaphone and like we can yell at them just a little louder and they'll hear. The Great De-Churching is the book that has just come out that talks about a lot of things about Gen Z. It talks about why are people leaving the church. And it's a depressing book, to be quite honest. I think a few of you said you'd read it. Who said they read it? Yeah. Pretty direct, pretty depressing. There's some hope at the end, right? And the gospel is hope, right? That's the thing, is the gospel is the answer for the things that we struggle with. But the largest shift ever in religious landscape is going on, has been going on right now, and it's in the negative trend, right? It's fewer and fewer people going to church. And so one of the chapters is about the missed generational handoff. And when asked, Gen Zers were asked, why did they leave the church? 68% said their parents played a role in leaving the church. And you can see some of the reasons that they came up with. 14% was an emphasis on cultural wars. They felt like that was too heavily influenced or too heavily talked about. A lack of love, joy, gentleness, kindness, and generosity. Gen Zers have grown up seeing a world that's in shambles. And I'm learning from my oldest that his disconnect is the world is in shambles, and the things that you are interested in at church, bigger buildings or trips or whatever, they don't match. It doesn't match. Why aren't we doing more to help the homeless? Why aren't we doing more to help the orphanages and those types of things? And one of the criticisms, and I say it to my son, I say, okay, yes, but what are you doing to solve that? So our Gen Zers have this great macro empathy, this big picture empathy. They see all of these things and they want us to fix it. And what we've got to do is help them put feet to that, right? And that's what maybe we get offended about sometimes. And sometimes I get frustrated with my son. I'm like, I agree. What are you going to do about it, right? What is it? Are you going to serve at a soup kitchen? Are you going to do those types of things? Until you're willing to put your feet to it, it's not any different than how you see us, right? So they see the world a little differently, and I think that this is why social justice issues are such an issue for them, right? And I know that's a controversial thing and people feel differently about it, but that's why they care about social justice issues, is because they see it all the time. They feel that the world is unjust. So an inability to listen, that reminds me of the megaphone, right? We're not willing to listen. An inability to engage in other viewpoints. Now, truth be told, the mirror could be looking right back at them too, right? Because they struggle to engage in other viewpoints. But they have to feel safe to do that. They have to have a relationship with somebody in order to engage in those. And then 13% because of racial attitudes or actions. And so that's just what the statistics say. I think that you probably can see that bearing out in the Gen Zers that you know as well. In 2020, and some of this had to do with COVID, but not all of it, But church membership for the first time in the United States fell below 50%. So we really are living in a post-church, post-Christian world. Thomas Kidd said COVID isn't necessarily transforming us. I mean, it isn't transforming it. It's just speeding up the changes that were already underway. So COVID kind of hit the gas pedal on everything. And so that particular book, if you're a pastor, if you're a church staff group together, that would be a great book to study together. Some of the quotes that I thought were interesting that I think speaks to sort of maybe where we're at too is the movement that spent 40 years at war with secular America is now at war with itself. The result is the fracturing of the American church. We see that in Baptist world, don't we? We're not each other. We're not the enemy. Satan is. I think we have to remind ourselves of that. But Satan loves to see us fight with each other. In just a generation, the children of the de-churched will be unchurched, changing the nature of spirituality in America. That's a scary thought, isn't it? According to Carrie Nieuwhof, who writes a lot about generational stuff as well, the Gen Z church. So when we think about what do Gen Zers want in church, he says that Gen Z church will be less produced, more personal, less performance-based. Do you hear some of the things that they struggle with coming out in what they want in church? More authentic, less head-driven, and more heart-driven. Another statement he says is stop trying to reach them or speak for them. Invite them around your leadership table instead and let them shape and make decisions. Maybe that's a pain point for us as church is, do we have Gen Zers at the table with us? He also believes that if you don't have a digital delivery system for your discipleship strategy, you don't have a discipleship strategy. We want there to be the relationships, but to have the ability to deliver that to them is very, very important. So take a look at your notes, turn to your neighbor, and ask yourself the so what question. Based on what you just heard, what is the so what for you in your churches? What should you be taking into consideration as you think about reaching Gen Zers? And I'll give you just a couple of minutes to talk about that. All right, if you want to sort of wind that up. I'm going to ask some of you to share a so what from your brilliant neighbor again so that we can benefit. There's such great diversity in this room that I think it's good for us to hear from pastors, from worship pastors, from anybody in this room that's thinking about this issue or these issues. So somebody share. What's the so what of that last segment of information for you?
The comment about leadership is, I think, a struggle. Like that's where we see an answer, is us trying to remove generational divides within the church. I get that culturally all these generations have different divides, but one great way to remove some of those gaps is to place younger or place different. If you're a primarily younger church, find older individuals. If you're a primarily older church, find younger individuals and give them authority. Like, not necessarily biblical authority. I mean, we're not talking about pastoral.
Right.
We're talking about make decisions, let them have teeth to the things that they say, so that they have buy-in and investment.
Yep. So Growing Young is a book by the Fuller Youth Institute, and they talk about unlocking key chain leadership to younger groups such as Gen Z. Great, good job. I thought I saw a hand over here somewhere. Yes, sir.
Primarily, and myself being a member of Gen Z, I am 23 years old. They are seeking realness, seeking genuineness. That so much it seems like smoke and mirrors over the last 10 years, that wanting reality and not be seen as just a kid that doesn't know anything that has been portrayed, but to be seen as a real person.
Good, and we're going to talk about that this afternoon, even related to Gen Alpha, about being authentic. That's a huge issue that I think has huge implications for worship, because honestly, everything is so production that they don't see themselves up there. They wonder, I'm struggling, like I'm so worried I can't even get out of bed, but this person up here feels like everything's always great. How do I connect with that person? And of course there's boundaries and there's limits about what you can do with that, but they don't see themselves being reflected on the stage. And if you look at, there was a study done on music, worship music, and there's not lament in our worship. There's not negative feelings expressed. There's not reality in that either. And so that's an interesting concept. So what else before we keep moving? Somebody else? Oh, good.
Shelly, one of our live stream sites has sent a question that says, what does digital discipleship look like to be effective?
Well, I think it's about providing resources for these small groups. It could be something like Right Now Media or those type of things. How do you deliver sermon notes and those types of things is what they were alluding to. Anybody else over here? Good.
I was going to say, looking at what's missed, a couple of the points, and ability to engage in other viewpoints and their racial attitudes or actions. I've noticed with my own boys, they're 15, just a desire to be able to see the other side of the coin. Mm-hmm. And I think when we don't, we really shut them down. And I think representation is important. I know that's kind of a buzzword, but just seeing people up on stage who look like you. One of my children is black, he's adopted, and I mean, obviously our room isn't very diverse, and I would love for that to change, and I don't know exactly the ways to do that, but I do think those things are important, is seeing somebody up there that looks like you.
Right. Our churches should be a reflection of our community in terms of diversity. And I think that is missing. And I would say it's not just racial, it's also family structure too. And we'll talk about that later, about just the large number of single adults. And what does that look like in the church? Do we ever have them featured? Do we ever do anything with them? And so I think there's a lot to think about, right? So let's go to something. Let me tell a story. You guys like stories? Actually, they say if you want to teach something, you got to tell a story. So I want to tell you a story about myself. I like to do runs. I walk more now, but I used to do a lot of running. But I have some friends, and we do runs. We've done Disney runs, and now we're doing national park runs.
Somebody chasing you?
No, nobody's chasing me. And actually, this past weekend I fell, and I've got bruised ribs from falling. But that was a whole other thing. I took my eye off the road and met a cone and splatted on the ground. But this is a story about, we did a run at Zion National Park. Has anybody been to Zion? Oh my goodness, is that not the most beautiful place in the whole world? It is gorgeous. So we're going to do this half marathon, and so we like to do hiking before or after. There's 3 ladies. We've been through life together. We've buried people we love together. We've birthed people together. We've done a lot together, served in churches together, those types of things. And so we always like to hike. So I did the research, and I was like, we need to find some hiking to do in Zion National Park. And so I found a webpage, and it said you need a hiking permit. So I was like, I'm signing up for a hiking permit. And I see this one called Angel's Landing. And so I just signed up for the hiking permit, and they said you'll get notification, in a month to see if you got in the lottery and you get to do it. So I didn't really think anything about it, but about a month later, I got the lottery, and it said you're in. You get to hike Angel's Landing at such and such time on such and such day. And so it was then that I began to research what Angel's Landing was. And Angel's Landing is not a good term. That is not reflective of what this hike is. Has anybody hiked Angel's Landing? Oh, we got some stories we could probably tell then. So I Googled it, and first thing that comes up is most dangerous hikes in America. Angel's Landing. And at that time, 13 people had died, And so I'm telling the ladies, I'm like, I don't know what we got into, but what do y'all think? And they're like, let's do it. Let's do it. So we did. And you can see here's it's a strenuous climb, narrow route with cliff exposures, which means that there are points when, and you can tell them I'm not lying, where it's literally up and down and it's just a path where you walk across. But you get to go to this amazing place, right? So we decided to do it. We showed up and we started hiking up. It's a good 4-hour hike, probably 5-hour hike. And so we were going along, and we start to bond with the people that we're with, all the other hikers, because there's those beautiful pictures where you go, hey, will you take our picture? We'll take yours. You know, we get to know each other. We're going up. And then we start to realize that we are skewing the age quite a bit. Now, you were skewing the age, too, when you were up there. But we started to notice, oh, boy, that was ugly. So sorry. That may have been the dumbest thing I ever said right there. This goes down as a really bad thing. All right, so focus back, yeah. So, but mostly young people, okay? Mostly young people, and Landon, Cecile, and Lori and I start kind of, going, wow, we're kind of older, and I was 53, and our oldest person was in her late 60s, but we just kept going. And I would always ask the people, because then there would be people coming down. And I started asking them, hey, is it worth it? How was it? Is it worth it? Because I wanted to know, is it worth it, right? And I also wanted to know that they made it. And they would say, oh, it's so worth it, but you got a long way to go. But it's worth it, and they would tell us. And so we kept hiking, and we got to a point where there's you can only have one person coming down and one person going up. So you have to kind of pull over to the side, and the people that are coming down come down, and then the people that are going up. And we had gotten to know these people around us, and we were sitting there getting a drink and fruit snack or whatever it was we brought. And I turned to the girl, and we were talking, and I said, oh, hey, why don't you guys go on in front of us? I said, I'm sure we're slow. We're older, we're slow. And she said, oh, no, I'm good. And she kept on talking. And then it got time for our time. And I said, no, really, why don't you guys go in front of us? We've got all day. We're not in a hurry. I know you guys could do it way faster. And she said to me, no. She said, actually, I really like being behind you. She said, you all inspire me. And then she said, kind of what I just said to you. She said, I figure if you can do it, I can do it. And so I said, okay, whatever. So, we went up, and let's see. Here's some pictures of the ladies that I went. But actually, the top is at the top, right? That's where you end up. But I took away some things from that. Sometimes we're the ones who are inspiring behind, and sometimes we're looking at the people in front of us for inspiration. And I think in the local church that we're not on the same trails together very much with different generations. And I think that what I took away from it is I'm so glad I was on that trail with those younger folks, because I was reminded that they need us. They need us to see us doing hard things, that they actually take inspiration. And I got to thinking, and I'm thinking to myself, I just wonder how often we're on the same trails with different generations in our churches, and what would it look like to get on some of those same trails? And what would it look like to start using a two-way radio instead of a megaphone with that generation? What kinds of ways could our life be enriched? So the good news is we made it to the top, and obviously I didn't die. And it is one of my favorite days of my life. Now, I'm not going to say wedding or birth of babies. We're going to exclude those, because it was something hard, and it was something that I did together with friends, that we got to experience those things together. And I got to learn something along the way, too, that sometimes we're the inspirers, and sometimes we're the ones who need to be inspired. And our kids and our parents and our adults, we need each other. We all need each other. Generations need each other. And the more that we can, as this gentleman over here said, get us all in the same room, get us all on the same trail, get us all on the same channel, listening to each other, talking to each other, the richer our lives and the richer our journey is. We're going to break for lunch just in a few minutes, but I want you to answer these questions in your group. I want you to think about the needs of Gen Z, which, by the way, some of these are going to be similar for Gen Alpha, which is what we're going to unpack after lunch. Are we creating environments that match the needs of Gen Z? If we know they need relationships, are our environments as relationally driven as we need to be? How would you apply this to your ministry? Are you impacting other generations on the trail? Maybe for some of us, we just need to be reminded that we've got something to give. I have a life group, and there's older people in it. And you know what I benefit from the most is when they say, when I share something, they say, I've been there. Your kids are going to be okay. I've been there. I remember when my child couldn't figure out what they wanted to do. And, there's a benefit in being on a trail with somebody older and wiser that can help you know you're normal, to help you know that God has still got this. And then, are you personally, or are you as a church, do you use a two-way radio, or do you tend towards the megaphone? And what would that look like to shift? I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to talk about that. We'll wrap up right before we break for lunch. Okay, let's bring it back together. It's almost time for lunch. You guys can continue those conversations maybe at lunch. Just a couple of people just share real quick something that was said in your group that you think the rest of us need to hear. Somebody share something that you think the rest of us should hear.
Something in our church, we have, our children are brought in on a bus, and we have boomers basically as leaders, except for our teen groups, and we have millennials with our teens right now. But we were just discussing that if we sat down with them, make some class changes where we could have a few minutes and get that information from them. We might forego another program just to get that individual.
So prioritizing
understanding.
that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, prioritizing the individual one-on-one. And we're going to talk about that with Alpha, because attunement is part of that, what we're talking about. Good. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
We just talked about how we can be more intentional about bringing senior adults and our students on a Wednesday night. We do a quarterly prayer time. We're intentionally just praying together as a congregation, all ages, but how we can kind of create groups and atmospheres where there's a two-way radio there with built-in questions, and just for the purpose of hearing some of the struggles that all generations have, and trying to just do more bridge building between those generations.
Great ideas. And some of these ideas don't cost anything. It's just thinking intentionally about things, right? Anybody from over here want to share before we go to lunch?
Talked about on Wednesday nights, the new church I started at, they were very sizable size, and they were all meeting together where I broke it down into small groups. And I'm teaching the high school boys on Wednesday nights. And our best nights are when I may not have a lesson or a sermon, we're just talking life and doing life together. And be that two-way radio for them. And it's really helped me build my relationships with them.
Yeah, taking that time. Sometimes we think we have to have a program, or we have to have a point, and really the need of the moment can be the point. And I think if you ask kids, that's what they want. That's what they really want, is somebody to notice that they're there and to listen to them. Our last one before I let you guys go to lunch.
If we function just as two-way radio or as a megaphone, doesn't that mean we've still got a distance between us?
Yes, that is true. That's a great point.
If we have the relationship, that won't be necessary as much, and plus they'll catch more other things that are really good.
Yeah, I like that. You've extended the metaphor a little more, that when we're right next to each other, we won't need either one of those, will we? All right, Belinda.
Thank you. Just a few instructions for lunch. Before we get started, I want our next gen kind of staff. We work in different offices around the facility in the State Board of Missions, but we do have the opportunity once a month. We get together and kind of talk about the things we're doing and topics that are hot. And so we are hot topics. Yeah, there you go. But we do have a good time together too. So yeah, we have a great time together. So I will start with Trish Jackson and let her introduce herself.
It's so good to see you today. I am in the Alabama WMU office. I'm the Next Gen consultant, so I work with missions discipleship leaders. We have events for this age, and I am scribbling as fast as I can on the back row. But I do have a few things. If you're in the room and you would love a sample of missions discipleship curriculum, Missions Journey Kids, grades 1 through 6. If you've never done that at your church, I have a free sample back there. I'm sitting on the back row center here. And also, one of the things I do is work with ministry wives. So if you're here, husbands, and you'd like to take home a free gift to your wife, a journal, girly journal, then I have a few of those back there as well.
I think instead of hot topic, we're really a hot mess. I'm Karen Gosselin, and I am in the Worship Resources Office. And as one of your state missionaries, worship is something that we think is a natural thing to do. It's in the Bible. It's all over the Bible. But really, most of us don't know how to worship. And part of what I do is in teaching how to worship, what we do with worship, which is engaging the mind, not just our preferences. Because I like this song or I like this. And we do that with our kids. Well, they're going to like this song because they hear it. Or the students, they're going to like this because it's really hot right now. But really, text is what is important. Really teaching them that when they put their devices down and they sing together, that is a community that they will remember forever. And so we do several different things with that next gen. We have some honor choir things that they can do, which is so great for them to be able to sing in 5 to 6 part harmony as children and as students, and get that connection of what it sounds like to be together. We also have a camp that teaches how to worship in age-appropriate styles, and it gives them a chance to do what we have just been talking about, which is learning how to be together, learning how to sing together, learning how to play together, because that is so vitally important. I have over on this table, over on the side, any kind of cards that deal of the things that deal with that next generation. And if you'd like to talk with me, I'd love to be able to chat with you. Or if you'd like to take a card with you, I'd love for you to take one of those. Feel free to call me at any time.
Thank you, ma'am. You have a whole table over there? I'm sleeping on the job. Tucked in a corner back there by the Mountain Dew, you'll find my cards back there. So my name is Larry Heitch, and I work in the area of men's discipleship. And so that includes boys, teens, and men. And we do a couple of different things. We're all over the board when it comes to discipleship. 2 events I want you to be aware of. One is for 1st through 6th grade boys and their dads or leaders, and it's coming up next month. It's called Adventure Weekend. Those cards are back there by the Sprite. And then the other one is for teenage guys. This is 7th through 12th grade, and we are going after some very difficult topics. A lot of what we're talking about this morning, we're trying to address in this one-day conference called Fortify. And in the breakout sessions, like when I say hard-hitting topics, it's stuff that, like, when we advertise it, I'm a little afraid someone in the building is going to let me know, hey, you can't put that in print. It's that kind of stuff. And so we are growing. This is our 4th year to do this, and so we would highly recommend check it out. Those cards are also back there. But if there's anything that we can do to help walk alongside your men, your teens, or your boys, please let us know.
All right, last but not least, first, did you ever think you would come to the state board and somebody with hair like this would stand up in front of you? And he would be employed at the state board? My name is Josh Meadows. I get the privilege of being the student ministry strategist here. And I have cards tucked back there somewhere around Larry's too. But I want to tell you this. My favorite thing that I get to do is connect with youth pastors and resource them. That is what, I mean, we have events, we do those things, all the stuff that you would expect that we would do. But more than those events, I love to be able to come and connect you with other leaders across the state. And so if there's anything that I can do to help your student pastor, your volunteer youth pastor, your volunteers in your church, whatever it is, we want to be a resource to you. And so those of you who lead student ministry, if you have not gotten any swag, I'm going to one-up all of them. All right? If you hadn't gotten any swag, you come find me before the day's over, and I'll at least get you a T-shirt before you leave. All right? But yes. Yeah. Got it. No. Hey, you don't have the mic now. Yeah. You don't have a mic. Yeah. You don't have the mic now. That's right.
All right. I love a good competition. And I want to win. So here's some balls from DBU over here, okay? I'll give away a few things too. Right? So DBU, if you don't know, has an amazing baseball team. Watch out over there. Whoa. Oh, wait. Let's see if I can get it all the way back. There we go. And one more all the way. Oh, she ducked. Good job. I think we got it. Okay, we're going to go Gen Alpha now on you. We have spent some time with Gen Z. Look at that. 19 of you are watching along. I love it. And so, picking a song for Gen Alpha is a little harder. But you might relate to this one. No, just kidding. You didn't want Taylor Swift, I know, so that's a song. But Generation Alpha is born 2010 to present. So they are 0 to 14 years old, and they're the newest kids on the block. 2010 is the year that the Instagram and iPad launched. And there's a viral video going around that this little boy says, "I'd rather have an iPad than a dog," right? That's kind of a random thing. Some people call them the celebrity generation because everything that they've done has been broadcast. If you think about gender reveal parties even, I mean, goodness, who had that when my kids, we didn't shoot a balloon to find out what they were, right? We just found out. But they've been on TV constantly their whole life. Mark McCrindle coined the term. He said they're going to be the most transformative, most disruptive generation, not in behavior, although they might, but more in just they're going to disrupt what we do. Similar to Gen Z, I think has disrupted work at home, right? There's some things that have changed. Amazon was a big disruption. Uber is a big disruption. Will be interesting to see what our alphas do. Here's a mic drop for us as church. The majority of them come from non-traditional or hurting and dysfunctional households. So in some ways, our target audience has always been the nuclear family. And part of the reason I think our churches are not growing is because our target audience is so much smaller, and we're missing out on all of these other households. Their first babysitter was an iPad. An average 7-year-old has already spent 1 year in front of his life on a screen, which is another thing that we might talk about in children's ministry, to say if we know they're on the screens too much, why would we want to put them up against a screen at church, right? More of a reason to think carefully about what technology, because the technology that they're using is 13th generation technology. And what we're using, for instance, broadcasting something from a video is really first generation. They're used to more interactive, collaborative, because they're tech creators more than tech consumers. 65% will end up working in a job that doesn't even exist yet, okay? Tim Elmore, in his book, makes some pretty bold statements, and he says the tablet is the new pacifier, the baby monitor is the new babysitter, Netflix is the new playground, Fortnite is the new pickup baseball game, Instagram is the new photo album, Google is the new encyclopedia, YouTube is the new TV, TikTok is the new shopping mall, medication is the new time out. So lots and lots and lots of changes for this generation. I love to show this video. I've showed it in a lot of places. It's a question that's asked of 3 different generations. What did you do for fun when you were a kid? I want you to think for just a moment about what you did for fun. If I asked you that question, what would you say? And I want you to watch this video, and as soon as it's over, I just want you to turn to that person next to you and talk about what struck you in that video, and then we will sort of unpack it for our purposes here in just a second.
Nature Valley created an eye-opening video by asking 3 generations of people in different families one very simple question.
When you were a kid, what did you do for fun?
So we go blueberry picking, for instance.
We grew watermelons, plantains.
I found an old sign which was big enough for me to sit on and made a great toboggan. It was very slick, very fast.
Not surprisingly, the older generations spoke about playing outside and creating their own games.
You know, you go door to door, get a group of kids, and you're just going out to the field and playing baseball.
And we built these massive forts, you know, the kind that you can actually sit in and play in, you know, with our friends, and it was just really wonderful.
The kids' description of fun activities were eye-opening.
Video games. I like to go on my phone, text, some email.
My favorite thing to do in the world is definitely watching videos and playing video games.
I would die if I don't have my tablet.
Whenever I feel upset, I'd play video games and I'd feel normal. It's really wonderful.
It's scary to think that they'll never have to leave the house.
I actually feel a little sad because I feel like he's missing out on what's out there in the beautiful world.
Nature Valley.
So Nature Valley is all about outdoor education, which I am too. But turn to your neighbor and just talk about what struck you in that video. What did you hear in terms of contrasting the olders and the youngers? And then we'll talk about it for just a moment. All right, if you can bring it back. We'll discuss it just a little bit. I want somebody to share with us what you noticed, what stuck out to you in that video.
No imagination.
No imagination. Okay, very good. Very good. Definitely not. Is that what you're going to say? Don't leave the house. Okay. What?
I was thinking about 72, 73, which I know some of these won't remember, the big snow here in Alabama.
Yeah.
Which I was in Phoenix City, we had 16 inches.
Oh, wow.
You had that now, the kids never coming out of the house.
Okay. Yeah.
We were out there for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have that now, they still won't come out.
Yeah.
That's true, too.
Okay. Good. Somebody in the back was wanting to say something. Yes.
The parents seemed very unaware, almost. That was a big thing. It kind of like it broke their hearts to see how the children were finding their happiness in a way of like, oh, I didn't even realize that that's what they did with all their time in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That's the first time somebody's pointed that out. That's a great point. They're very disconnected from what's really going on, right? Good. Yes, over here.
Is to go to technology, and it seems like I have to like force my kids to go. I mean, we do. They're outside all the time, but we have to force it. Like we're not, no, get out of the house, get out of the house.
Yeah.
You know, constantly go jump on the trampoline. All those things. We have to continually remind them that the screen is not always the answer.
Right. Yeah. And it's that ecosystem, and we were talking about it. This gentleman right here. It's just easier to go to the feed bins. It's just easier to go to the technology, right? And it changes everything. Yes, ma'am.
Existed, but we did not have cable until I was like 8 or 9. And so because I didn't have that and all I had was PBS, we didn't watch a lot of TV.
Yeah.
We watched like Wishbone and Reading Rainbow, but like we didn't watch a ton of things. Arthur? Yeah. But like then we didn't watch a ton of that until we had Disney Channel and Nickelodeon.
Right.
And then we shifted to being inside more and doing that more because it was constantly something on for kids.
This is true.
And so I lived that transition, and I was thinking about like
we would go to the park and play outside and make up games all the time. But I don't remember that so much after I was in like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And not just because I was aging out, more because there were indoor technology opportunities and it was easier.
Yep, individualized technology, right? I would love it on the Sunday nights that we'd get to watch the Disney, what was it, the Sunday night? Wonderful World of Disney, right? And that was a big deal. We would get a TV tray out and watch it because it wasn't on all the time. We didn't have Netflix. So let me bring up one thing that I know you were probably thinking that you didn't get to yet, just so we can keep moving forward, is did you notice the language difference in how they talked about their play? He did back here. Give us a insight.
The older folks said we went and played games, and it was in community. The younger ones kept saying, I.
Yep. Yeah, that's a huge thing if you really think about it. We is a beautiful word. And, you know, we have a lot of discussion about pronouns, but we is the best pronoun that our kids could learn. If they could be a part of something and say we instead of just me, that would make a world of difference, I think, in their lives. And so as you look and you listen to those folks, the older folks, there was joy in how they talked about their play and joy in how they made up games and toboggans and all those types of things. And for these particular kids, and we know that obviously this was marketed and it was thought through of how the message that they wanted to send, but I don't think it's that too far off from our kids. The girl that said she would die if she didn't have hers, that's a little dramatic, right? But I will say when our Wi-Fi goes down, what happens in your house? Everybody comes out. Suddenly you see everybody. So play has definitely changed. Yes, sir.
When you talk about the older folks that are talking about it, they're drawing from an experience, a memory. These younger people don't have the memories. There's nothing to draw from. Yeah. They spend 15 seconds on it and they move on. Right. It never sits in the mind or in your heart or in your life, and you can go back to that. There's nothing to go back to. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of the same way in our church services. The difference between experiencing that live and being there, worshiping together in community, would be that memory that you can draw back from, that you have that's real. Authentic, we talk about authenticity. Having something that's authentic, that's real, as opposed to just listening to the song on a radio.
Right.
And so we have to have meaning to what we're doing when we come together to worship.
Right.
And it has to be a community thing. One thing I try to do and try to express at our church is there is no division between the platform and the congregation.
Good.
We are there together. I am no more in this worship than you are. You are no more. We are together. We worship together. So we really try to press that we are in a community as a worship service. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
God is our audience.
Exactly.
So there's a lot we could think about, a lot that even makes references in some ways back to the Sean Killingsworth video, right? That the savannah is not there for them to play in. And so if we could do anything, I think, better that would make a huge difference is if we could be more about we than about me. And it plays out in our worship styles. You know, we've got to have 10 different worship styles because I got to worship the way I want to. It plays out in a lot of different things. We can be just as guilty of having this list of things that we want things to cater to us. But let's talk specifically about Generation Alpha. I'm going to break it down into kind of physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually real quick. First of all, there are physical things that we've noticed with these kids. According to the research, there's a decline in fine motor skills because swiping is not a fine motor skill, right? And they know how to swipe, but they're not sorting things with tweezers, and they're not doing a lot of clay and Play-Doh and those types of things. And so, you know, that is a deficit. It is something hopefully they can get better at. I teach kindergarten Sunday school, and I can tell you that my kids have a very big deficit in their fine motor skills. And so more fine motor skills activities are needed. Weaker hands, they're not doing the jungle gym. You know, they're not crawling as much. Sorry, guys. There's also some research being done on, it's called the hygiene hypothesis, which basically says we've cleaned ourselves and cleaned our kids so much that they're not able to fight things. So their immune system is much weaker. And there's a book that I like to share with my students called Let Them Eat Dirt. And it kind of goes along with that. And it basically says that there are good things in dirt that help our bodies be able to fight things. And so when we remove all dirt, when we remove all danger, when we remove all risk, we're weakening our kids rather than strengthening them. Their brain development is changing because of technology. They're being rewired for disconnection. There's obesity because they are sedentary more and more, and so getting them outdoors is so important. And then an interesting one that's come from COVID is increased myopia. So what that is our kids have good vision right here, but they're seeing more and more long vision problems with kids. And what the research is saying is it's because they have spent so much time looking up close and not enough time looking down the horizon to develop those muscles for their far vision. And the thing that they say that helps with far off vision and going down the horizon is play. It's outdoor play, because you tend to look down the horizon further. So those are some physical things that research is showing. Mentally, instead of learning to love books, and my library people up here will understand, they have learned to stream, right? They're streaming content. We are reminded, but we sometimes don't act as though we understand it, that there is a video deficit effect, that you don't learn as well from a video, that kids won't learn as effectively from a video. We also know that artificial intelligence is going to change the way that they think and the way that their brain processes information. If you think about just how texting has changed our Gen Zers' ability to write, think about artificial intelligence. Think about just all the ways, and if you haven't ever tried artificial intelligence, go to ChatGPT and type into something. I mean, you could type in, tell me about Generation Alpha, and they'd probably present a better presentation than I just did, right? Because they can pull information. And so our kids are going to grow up with some tools that are going to impact their mental capacities. They have a lack of the filters increasing, which creates an increasing need for critical thinking skills. So when I was growing up, my filter was Lee and Sandy. And Sandy Stevenson knows Lee and Sandy. She knew my mom and dad. But they would keep the bad out and let the good in, right? And our kids today don't have that. They don't have that filter. They don't have everything that they could possibly want to see and to do is right at their fingertips. And so they do need critical thinking skills. They do need to know how to think critically. Socially and emotionally, we're going to see some of the same things that we saw in Gen Z, but the anxiety and depression, if you talk to doctors and counselors, it's going up lots and lots more than ever before. They do also have lower levels of empathy. They have been isolated. If you think about, it's just been 4 years since COVID, but they were very much more isolated growing up. And there's a lot of things that you learn from people when you're young. And so when you, for instance, don't have the ability to see facial expressions because of masks, there's language development issues. If you talk to most teachers, they'll tell you that kids are a little bit behind in some of those areas because of that. And I'm sure there'll be lots of dissertations written on that and lots of books written on that. Some have used the term nonverbal learning disabled, which kind of goes along with what I just said, meaning that they're not really noticing the body language, the facial expression, and some of those nuances that they would have noticed had they not been looking at people with masks on for the formative time of their life. So there's just some things that have impacted them that haven't ever impacted generations before. They have diminished levels of FaceTime. And I'm not talking about this because they know how to do FaceTime, but face-to-face interactions. There's a book called The Cyber Effect, and this author opens up the book and she talks about this mom, which we're all guilty of doing these things. So no one is righteous, no, not one. But this mom got into a train and had this little baby and needed to feed the baby and propped the baby up and kind of put the bottle like this. And the author said she watched the mom then mess with her phone the whole way on the train. And her observation was how different that is from previous generations. When we fed our babies, what did we do? We talked to them, we looked at them, we sang to them, we did those kinds of things. And just that is an impact. And so that's an impact for preschool ministry. What should we be doing in preschool ministry? Looking at them, talking to them, singing to them, those types of things, because they may not have gotten that as much. A couple of other things that are important. 34% are growing up in a single-parent home. 43% are growing up without a father. Some of our ministry, that's hard for kids who come from those situations. It's hard for them to feel like they belong when they have a different family structure. Spiritually, we've talked about a post-Christian world, but now we're talking about a post-church world, right? A world where we can just watch church online. And so they're growing up in that environment. They're exposed to opposing worldviews almost from birth. As I said before about my parents being a filter, it also used to be that we could kind of help our kids have their own beliefs pretty firm, kind of like Jell-O. It's kind of set before the world would start to hammer away at it. And now it seems to me that kids are being questioned about their faith before it's really ever set. You know, they're aware of things and differences in beliefs at a much younger age. And so they also have sort of an ingrained skepticism. And we also see, and I would say this comes true with Gen Z too, is that idea of deconstructing their faith. And some of that's developmentally appropriate. We've all went through times in our life when we doubted, and particularly in that teenage, young adult time when we needed to make our faith our own. But it's a little more complex for them, I think, because they haven't had a good start, a good firm foundation. And so some of those issues are going to become more and more important for us to address. One of the things, if we could give a couple of things to do or to be for this generation, is attunement, or to be attuned. Attunement, I think, is going to become similar to the word resilience. You know, resilience was like the word of the year in 2020. But attunement, this is not attunement, right? What do you see up there? Everybody looking at different things, right? They're all individuals. And if you look at the picture on the right, you see a dad who's somewhere else. He's physically there, and again, no one is righteous, no, not one. We have all done this. So I'm not pointing this out as a righteous person, because I've done the same thing. But imagine kids growing up where parents are forever elsewhere. Parents are forever distracted. And honestly, some of it's not our fault, right? When you think about COVID, what were parents trying to do all at once? Teach, work, parent, be a spouse, all of those things at once. Nobody let up, right? And so that's kind of, I think, when we became such a distracted parenting generation, is when we had to try to do all of those things at once. And so Gen Alpha, some of them have grown up with that experience as a child. And so we have to be attuned as parents, but also as children's ministers, as student ministers, as preschool ministers. And in contrast to that other picture, this is what attunement looks like, right? That's my daughter, by the way, this one right here. She went to a mission trip in Germany, and somebody snapped that picture of her. And I said, Lexi, that's attunement. I'm going to use that in my, so she's been famous. But I love it because she's looking at her eye to eye. Now, there's some kids you don't look at eye to eye. That's a hard thing for them. So you have to know your audience. Some of them you just need to be next to them. But our kids need FaceTime. in our classrooms, in our ministries, they need to know that we care. They need to know we're interested. They need to know we love them and that we want to understand their story. And so attunement can't happen from a stage. Attunement doesn't happen just with the children's minister in a large group of kids. Attunement doesn't happen just with a youth minister in a large group of kids. Attunement doesn't happen with a pastor in front of a large group of kids. Attunement is a one-on-one. It's more than just attention, because we can be an absent presence. But it's a deep sense of connection, and it's to be truly seen and known. And if I think about it, Jesus was pretty good at that. Can you think of some stories in the Bible where people were truly seen and known? The woman at the well. Zacchaeus, that was the one that I loved. He saw Zacchaeus. Jesus and the children. Oh, we could do a whole thing on that, right? The woman with the blood. All she had to do was touch. Yes, sir. Bartimaeus. Yeah. So Jesus understood that concept, didn't he? And so one of our goals has to be that every child, everybody gets a look of love every week, right? Gets a conversation with an adult every week. Whatever it takes to do that. That's what kids need if we want to be like Jesus. So we want to be attuned, but we also need to be authentic, and we've already hinted at this, and we've talked about this. Several of you have brought this up. And I don't know that we're very good at it. I think generationally, we've just wanted to, and maybe we were raised to just appear to have it all together all the time, right? And what we're finding is that our kids really need to know, how does my faith help me in the really hard times? And I did a little interview with a girl one time, and I asked her, what did you need from children's ministry that you didn't get? Or what could I tell children's ministers that you needed? Because this particular young lady had grown up in church. She did everything all the time. Like, she did vacation Bible school, camp, all of these things. In the teenage years, she did all of the things that you would want her to do as a teenager, was involved in everything, went off to a Christian university and had a horrible experience with a guy. And her faith was completely rocked. And she felt a great deal of shame. And she turned away from the church for a period of time. And this interview that I did with her was after she had worked through all of that and kind of came back. But I asked her, and she said, I feel like children's ministers give out rose-colored glasses. She said, I feel like what I thought is if I just kind of did what I was supposed to do, God was going to have like a yellow brick road laid out for me, and everything was going to be just fine. And she said, what I really wish they knew was that you need to make warriors and not just followers. And my jaw dropped, But guess who was her children's minister? Me. I had made sure that they had lots of fun. And I had made sure that they knew all the great stories and all the ways in which God showed up. But what I hadn't done is really share with them how to make it through the hard times. I hadn't really acknowledged those harder stories. The Hebrews 11, it talks about by faith all these people did it, but you know what happens at the end? You know what it says? It says there was also some that were faithful who were sawed in two, who were martyred. All of these things. And for me, I didn't have a theology of suffering growing up. I just thought, as long as, like her, if I just do what I'm supposed to do, God's going to lay it out, and it's going to be okay. And so we've I think we propagated a little bit of a formulaic faith. If I just do this and this will happen. And I think what kids need is an authentic faith, because when we're not authentic, it creates problems for them. And what I've noticed is there's two common paths when kids are faced, or we're faced with difficulty. Maybe God's not real, or maybe it's me. Shame and blame. This young lady went to the shame and blame, which a lot of us ladies do. And it took her a long time to get back to a point where she could realize that God had been with her, that being a Christian didn't mean that she would be saved or not have to suffer. And so how do we want kids to respond is we want them to grow up in a faith tradition where we share in age-appropriate ways that hard things happen, but that God is with us. And so we want them to respond with, this is really hard, but I know it's normal to face difficulties, and I'm going to lean into my faith. And I've done the hard things before, and I can do this hard thing. And more than that, maybe, we want them to be like David and Goliath. Not the part where he kills Goliath, although that'd be great. But when David's talking to Saul, and he's trying to convince him, hey, I can fight this giant, he says, it's my favorite little part of the story that I'd overlooked until a few years ago. He says, God has helped me fight a lion and a bear, and God is going to help me fight Goliath. And so the truth for me as a parent, and maybe for you, is that I've got to allow my kids to see me fighting some lions and bears, and also to allow them to fight some lions and bears, to give them that confidence to be able to say, this is hard, but God's helped me before, and God's going to help me now. And I think we used to do a better job of that because I grew up in the church that Sandy's dad was our pastor, and I remember us having like testimony times, and you kind of had a glimpse into people's life. You kind of would hear stories about hard things. And I think what it taught me, and what I hope it taught me anyways, is that hard things happen, but we have examples. We have people who've been on the trail before us. And so part of our job in being authentic is to provide that example of what it means to live in a world that's in shambles, but to trust in a God who's always faithful. And the way that we do that is by being authentic. It looks different in different places, looks different in different age groups. But I think what we've heard consistently from Gen Zers is they're tired of the performance. They just want to know, how are you getting through life? How is it that you're making it? How is it that I can be married and have a spouse and have kids and all those types of things? And so it's a step back from the polished professionalism and a step into, this is authentic. This is who we are. So being authentic. So I want you to turn to your person and do a so what. You may need to stretch for a minute, but I want you to think about what we just talked about and do the so what. What does this mean for you in your church position or in how you relate to kids? From y'all, what did you take away from just this chunk of material maybe? What's a so what? Yes, sir.
To say, you know what, God, this really sucks. I don't know how to do this. And this brokenness I'm feeling, it's real. Yeah. Do you care? Give him a chance to show you the depth of his love and how powerful it can be to pull you up out of the muck and mire and say, you know what? I love you, son, daughter, right where you are. That's what this guy said.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, I think it goes back to that study I mentioned about worship and how lament is missing. And if you look at the Psalms, you know, there's a lot of pouring out of ourselves. And it's in pouring out of ourselves that we recognize, again, the greatness of God. So that reality component. And if you think about it's in direct opposite of the way they're living their life, with the filters, with every picture is doctored to look a certain way. But the cry of their heart is, would you love me if I was real? Right? Okay, something else.
The picture of your daughter on the level with the child reminded me of a story that I've heard of a preschooler sitting at the dinner table with their family. And the family's busy. And the child wants their attention, and the child keeps saying, I want to tell you something, I want to tell you something. And the family's like, yeah, go ahead. And I want to tell you something, I want to tell you something. They're, okay, well, tell us. And the child stands in their chair and says, listen to me with your eyes.
Wow.
And as an adult, if I'm talking to you, another adult, I want you to be looking at me. I want your attention. That's how I know you're listening.
Yeah.
That's right. You know, how often do we talk to a child and they're all over the place, and we'll just softly and have them look at us so we know that they're listening. And so
Powerful.
I just think that that's, listen to me with your eyes.
Yeah, and I think we take for granted that we think our kids think we're looking at them. But if you really look at the landscape, we're not looking at them. We're looking at everything else. We're forever elsewhere. We think multitasking is a spiritual gift, right? And it's really not. And I'll ask the kids in my class at Mother's Day and Father's Day, you know, because we'll write those little things, what they like to do with their mom and dad. It's always, I love to play. I love playing with my mom and dad, right? Because when you're playing, you're focused. And so it's cool because those are the things we can give. They don't cost a lot. But for some reason, we've lost that art of the face-to-face. Okay, one more. Anybody else want to mention something? Are y'all just ready to go to the next thing? Okay, let's go to the next thing. Spurgeon said, train up a child in the way way he should go, but be sure you go that way yourself. Right? That'll preach, for sure. You know, one of the issues that we are struggling with, and I know Gen Z struggles with this too, is how do we help kids have a biblical worldview? How do we help them have that foundational knowledge? And I think I wrote down just a few things, I think, to help us think about this with kids, is the question of when does it start? You know, it starts in utero. And helping our parents to understand the things they listen to, the things that they talk about, the things that they say, all of those have the opportunity to impact a child's worldview. And what we do with preschoolers on Sunday morning is so foundational to who they're going to become. Just as we would never wait to start talking to kids and getting them to learn to say our name until they were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, we ought to be talking the language of faith when they're babies to them. Preschool ministry is so important. And there's a tendency to think it's just babysitting or it's just childcare, but it's teaching. And it starts in that infant room. We can pray over kids, we can sing over kids, we can show them the Bible, we can let them touch a Bible. But a biblical worldview, if we wait until they're in children's ministry or preteen ministry or teenage ministry, we've lost already years and years of influence. And so I think one of the implications is, let's teach preschoolers about God unashamedly, and let's put our best people in there, not just people we can find, right? God speaks to young children in the same way he speaks to adults, through the power of the Holy Spirit, through relationships among the people of God, through the revelation of his will and purpose in scriptures. And so part of our commitment has to be, when kids are in our care, whether they're babies, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, or 20-year-olds, that every time they come, they're going to hear about God. Every time they come, they're going to listen to us talk to God in a way that makes them want to talk to God, because of the way that we talk and the way that we share our life with them. As I teach kindergarten Sunday school, I don't do everything right by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things that I try to do, as often as it makes sense and as often as the Lord leads me to do it, is to say, you know what God taught me in this story this week, boys and girls? He reminded me to trust him, so that my kids see that I'm learning something too, that there are things that Miss Shelly has to work on. And that's part of being in that we. We is the pronoun we want our kids to use when they think about church. We want to teach kids and young children to recognize God's voice. Can God talk to children? Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to use Scripture, obviously, to impact their spiritual formation. We want them to open a Bible, a real Bible, every time they come to church, so that they know that's God's special book. That's the book we go to. That's the book that Miss Shelly goes to when she's sad. That's the book Miss Shelly goes to when she needs to know what to do. That's the book that we go to, and that's the book that's true. And then we want to teach kids to know God and not just know about God. That experience, somebody said it over there. It's that experience of knowing and loving God. And that biblical worldview is what's going to help them survive a world where the further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. That's where we are today. That was said a long time ago. But that's where we are today. Our kids have to know what's truth, because truth, according to the world, is relative. Experiences and feelings determine beliefs, and that's what people will tell you. That's what people will tell our kids, is however you feel, whatever you believe is true. According to Barna, only 4% of Americans have a true biblical worldview. And the two questions that really determine that, whether there is a biblical worldview, is if you believe, does absolute moral truth exist? And for Christians, the answer is yes. And is absolute truth defined by the Bible? And the truth of that is what? Yes. What the world teaches our kids is that they are their own authority and they create their own truth. And many of the issues that our kids are struggling with is misplaced authority. They have taken authority over their bodies, and they're making decisions based on their feelings, right? And so we have a big job. We have a big job to teach kids how to have a biblical worldview, but it has to be centered on truth. And never has it been more important than it is today for us to take seriously what we teach kids on Sunday morning or Wednesday nights or whenever it is that you do activities. And so for Generation Alpha, and I would say this is true for Gen Z as well, but some of the needs that they have are truth. That's. I think if you asked me what is the biggest issue that worries you the most beyond relationships, it's not knowing what truth is for our kids. Truth. Unfiltered faith. Our kids are living in a filtered world, and they need an unfiltered faith. And the cool thing is that an unfiltered faith is a real faith, and we can trust God with our life with it, right? There's a lot of hope in that. They need mentors. They need guides. They need people on the trails with them to inspire them, to encourage them, to support them, to take their picture when they do good things and to pick them up when they fall. This particular generation also needs gap fillers. When you think about the need in terms of kids without a father, who is going to fill that gap? Are we filling that gap? When a child or a teen comes to church, do they feel like they don't belong because they don't have a dad? Or do they feel like the church is their family and the church is filling in their gaps? It's a big difference, right? But if we have 43% of kids without a dad, how are we going to fill that gap? That's a hard question. And if you've grown up without a dad, you know that pain of listening to a sermon that talks about how important dads are, but knowing you don't have that. You know that pain. And so at the very least, we need to speak hope into them. To acknowledge, I know some of you don't have that, but I know a God who loves you, who will never leave you. And as a church, we want to fill in that gap. We want to be a part of filling in some of those needs because God has a great plan for you too. But our kids hear some of those other messages and they think already they're behind the curve or already they don't belong. And so we have to be careful, I think, about how we talk about those things. We always want to value two-parent families. We always want that to be our goal. But you're missing 43% of your kids if you don't acknowledge but some of them are dealing with a lot of pain in their own family. And we have an opportunity to speak into that. They need a relational pedagogy. What does that mean? They need to learn through relationships. All learning happens best through relationships. And so rethinking maybe what we do, how we do it. Yes, we probably are always going to need some big group things. I don't think we need to abolish big groups necessarily. But if we don't focus on small groups, it won't matter what you did in big group. Right? And so thinking about how can I, with the people I have, the resources that I have, how can I craft a more relational pedagogy where there's time. We don't necessarily need the two-way radio, but there is time to talk and to listen. And then they need to learn micro-empathy. And I can't remember if I mentioned this to somebody over here or if I mentioned it earlier. But our kids, particularly Gen Z, they have a lot of macro-empathy. They see a world that's hurting. They think we should do something about that out there, but they haven't put it to their feet. And they haven't done the micro-empathy. They haven't reached over to their neighbor and said, how can I help you? I see that you need your lawn mowed, or whatever it might be. And so our kids need to learn that micro-empathy because that's not the same. Macro and micro are not the same. Right? And I call my kids out on that. I have a son who's 25, and he's very concerned about things in our world. And I have to call him out and say, but what are you doing about it? What's something little you can do about it? I know you're frustrated with us for not fixing this. I know that you're frustrated that we don't think it's as important as you do. But what are you doing? What could you do to actually be a part of the solution? And so our kids need that micro-empathy. So let's end a little bit more on a positive note, though, for Generation Alpha and for really Gen Z. Because in every generation, the things that happen to us shape us. They shape us in good ways and they shape us in bad ways. But there are definitely some ways in which I think could be strengths. One of the first things that I think Gen Z or Gen Alpha may have is more adaptability and more resilience. Because they've already in their short young life learned that the world doesn't revolve around them. When everything got shut down with COVID, they learned a really hard lesson. They can't control everything. Their parents can't control everything. That we have to have birthday parades instead of birthday parties. That we have to postpone things. That we have to reinvent things. That we have to learn how to make lemonade out of lemon. And so I think, potentially, they could be a lot more adaptable and a lot more resilient because they've had to be. I do think they have an increased appetite for community. I don't know that they know how to put it into words, but it's a deep hunger that all of us have. It's the way we were created, to have connection. They have a global mindset. That's why I think there are missions people in the room. I think they do really see a world that needs Jesus. And they do really want to be a part of it. And so I think we have an opportunity to sort of rebirth some of those things that used to happen before we became so self-focused. But if you think about, when I grew up, I had to go to my grandparents' house to get the encyclopedia out to learn about what was happening in Africa. I had to get a National Geographic out to look to see those children that had the big tummies because they had nothing to eat with the emaciated bodies. It wasn't in front of me all the time. In GAs, we would spin the globe and point to where Indonesia was, but I had no idea what was actually going on in Indonesia. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. Is this your opinion of Gen X or
Gen Alpha? Uh-huh.
Or is it one of the books that you referenced earlier?
This is mine. Is that bad?
I was just wondering, you believe Gen Alpha is resilient?
I think they have the potential to be more resilient than other generations. Yeah. I don't know that they actually are, but I think that they have the potential to be more resilient. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so missions, back to missions. I think that they have they've grown up seeing all that in front of them all the time. And so they have more of a desire. I noticed this when in our church, this was after I was off staff there, but we had a new pastor come in and they wanted to refurbish a building. It was actually the children's building. And it was not the parents who got excited about it. Some of them had just been to the missions committee to ask for money to help go to Nicaragua to help an orphanage, and they got turned down. And then the next week, the church is raising money to make the children's building better. And not that they didn't want a children's building better, but in their mind, it made no sense. Does that make sense? Because they were seeing things that we didn't grow up seeing, okay? So, critical thinking skills, I think they could be developed. This is not something that they have developed yet, but if we help them, I think they can develop those critical thinking skills to be able to know what's true and what's not. I think they'll lead us forward to more authenticity. And every pendulum swings, right? I mean, everybody agrees that the production of services swung too far, I think. And so the pendulum swings back. And now it's more about authenticity. They're also champions for diversity, because that's their life. That is who they are. Their whole life, they have been in diverse situations. And so they understand that that's a normal part of life, and I think that they will lead us in those ways, in good ways, and not in bad ways. So that's Generation Alpha in a nutshell. They are going to be written about for many, many years. I don't know yet what the next name is. It may be Beta, since we went Gen Z, Alpha, Beta. But there's not a lot of writing yet on them. And so what we're going to do after we come back from break is talk about how do we apply this, how do we mind the gaps, and we'll explain that here in a minute. But I want us to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for our last hour.
Wow, y'all are doing such a good job of getting quiet. Thank you. I appreciate it. I hope that all of you have enjoyed Shelly being here today. I feel like I've learned a ton. What about you? Yes. So thank you, Shelly. She has a flight to catch, and so she and I are going to be exiting very quickly at 3. So she's not going to be able to stay around and talk or anything at that time, but just so you know, that's why we are leaving fast, so we can make sure she gets on the plane, back to Dallas, and back to work tomorrow, right? Right. One other event that I want to mention, specifically for preschool and children's ministers and churches, all churches really, no matter what size, it will be appropriate for you. This summer, we will have a training for preschool and children's leadership in your church, volunteer and paid workers. It will be on August the 4th at Westwood Baptist Church in Alabaster. Rick Callahan will be graciously hosting us. And Jana Magruder with Lifeway Kids will be our keynote speaker there. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book Flip the Script. It's another great resource. The tagline is Disrupting Tradition for the Sake of the Next Generation. So they talk about relationships a lot in this book and how important they are. Really goes along a lot with what Shelly has talked with us today about and how to implement some of these things practically in your churches. Talks about what influencers are important in these children and preschoolers' lives. Friends, leaders, influencers, and pastors. So especially for you senior pastors here, it's a good read for you too. If you want to pick it up, I think you can download it free from the Lifeway website. But there's just it's a quick read, and Jana will be speaking on some of these things at that conference. It's a Sunday afternoon at 2:30. So those of you close to the Birmingham area will be able to get there, and it'll be a 3-hour training conference. So mark your calendars for that. Again, thank you for coming. We appreciate your support. We also appreciate you giving through the cooperative program. Because of that, we can have things like this for you. So thanks.
All right. One more hour, 45 minutes. Can we do it? All right, we can do it. We're going to spend some time this last hour. I've titled it Minding the Gaps. from macro trends to ministry strategies. If you've been to London, they tell me, I've been there, but I don't remember it, but that when you are getting on and off a train, that a voice says what? Mind the gap. Mind the gap. And the point is to mind what you're doing to make sure that you get from where you are to where you want to be, and that you don't fall or that you don't trip. And I thought about it in the sense of us as leaders, that with different generations, with different people, some of them are struggling to get from the platform to the train, right? And for some of them, it's because there is a gap. There's a gap that they are having a hard time getting over. And so what we're going to talk about is just how do we mind those gaps so that we can get people on the train, right? That we can get them on the discipleship train, that we can get the gospel to them. But I want to, first of all, we've heard a lot of information, and I want you to watch this video, and I'll tell you why here in just a minute. But I really want us to remember why we do what we do, and hopefully that will help us think carefully about how we can change what we do. Okay, so watch this quick video real quick. I think it'll bless you. Michael Jr., who doesn't love Michael Jr.?
A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I see.
Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
It's a good word. I think about that even with us today. All of that information, all of that context of our kids, that should be our why for what we're going to do about it. Right? It can't just be business as usual. It can't just be let's do what we've always done. But because we know now how much they need relationships, because we know now the issues that we're facing, it should fuel us, just like it fueled that guy to sing like that, to think about what can we do to be used by God to reach Gen Alpha and Generation Z. So that's what we're going to spend a few minutes doing. Every context is different. Every church is different. Some of you are doing a bang-up job at certain things, and others of you are doing a bang-up job at other things, and some of us are struggling in all things, right? We're all in a different place. But I want us to think just real quickly with each other, what are the gaps that you see in your church, in your context? What are those generational gaps that you see that maybe were brought to light through some of the information? I want you to write down just the top 5 gaps that you maybe are walking away from here thinking, this is the gap in my church. I'm going to give you like 3 minutes to do that. You can talk with each other. And then we're going to unpack some that I've already identified, but I'm hoping that also you'll have some that we can talk through as well. So identify those 5 gaps that you think you might need to address. Okay, let's come back together. Hopefully you've gotten a list there. And I'm going to share with you some of my gaps that I see, and then hopefully we'll also have some time to unpack this. But let me offer this one up here first as an example. This is a statistic from one of the resources. The period of highest religious interest, and that's from de-churching, is from ages 0 to 18. The period of lowest religious interest is 18 to 25. So as we think about our churches, we probably feel pretty good about what we do from 0 to 18, I hope. We're feeling better about it. We have some ideas about what we can do. But what are we doing about this group, and why do we think that this group has such a low interest? Let me offer a couple of things. I think that as churches, we do not do much for kids after they graduate high school. From the time they graduate high school to the time they're married, there's just not a lot, which may be why they're disinterested. But also, this is a new statistic from Pew Research Center. 1/4 of U.S. 40-year-olds have never been married, a record high. So one gap that I can tell you exists is ministry for kids who haven't yet got married, who are post-high school but not really, their college and career, but also those who have not yet married. So we don't see a lot of them in our churches. Why do we not see a lot of them in our churches? There's nothing for them. Now, I've talked to some of you, and I know that some of you guys are engaged in young adult ministry and young singles ministry. I know Belinda is. I think Sonia is. It's beginning to be sort of emphasized again. But if there's nothing for them, should we be surprised that there's this big gap that they're not getting across? Right? So every church has to decide if they're going to address that or not. But that's one of those gaps due to changes in marriage, changes in the age of marriage that we're not addressing, I don't think, as a church. So that may be a gap that you might be interested in. Another gap is this thing we've been talking about called belonging. Belonging is a primary pain point for people. We all want to go where everybody knows our name. Don't we? And when we don't belong, we don't want to go. And the reality is that in our young families, people are finding a more compelling and rich community around their children's sports teams, because that's who they're spending the majority of the time with. So a gap is belonging. If you think about people who came back from COVID, I would say that maybe a common characteristic would be they already felt like they belonged. And they wanted to get back to where they belonged. One of the books, and I believe it's the de-churching books, I can't remember if I have this on my slide or not. The slowest group to return is the boomers right now. I'm interested to know why. Don't really know exactly why, but they aren't returning as quickly as what we might have thought. So belonging. We know that through different studies that different people have done, that when they asked somebody what keeps you involved at church, that 1 out of 3 people responded with personal relationships. Yes, the sermon is important. Yes, the music is important. But right up there. And sometimes I know people who will stay in a church that they don't necessarily like just because they know they're loved there. Right? But people will never stay in a church unless they know they're loved there. So first relationship, then formation, first belonging, then belief. So that whole belonging issue may be a gap. Some of our single adult friends have said, I haven't returned to church because I can sit by myself at home and watch TV and not feel nearly as alone as if I go to church and sit by myself. And that was an unintended thing for them to realize, right? That's not something that we intended. But it is a reality that some of them face. And so how do we bring back, or how do we enhance? I'm sure that already every church is different. So, your church may be really doing well with this. But for a lot of us, we're struggling. How do we have relationship-rich environments? I think it's a reminder that there is no learning without relationships. I think we already mentioned it. You're here today because somebody believed in you. You had a relationship with somebody who introduced you to Jesus. That we have to prioritize the spiritual formation of children and students. That if we want to shift the tide, if we want to turn the tide, we've got to put our best people in the children and student area. We've also got to train parents. We've also got to disciple parents. But to have any chance at turning this tide that's talked about in the de-churching, we've got to prioritize their spiritual formation. We've also got to move from an individualistic model to a community or family model. Adults, kids, we respond to being part of something. We, remember, is the pronoun we want kids to think of when they think about church. That's a place where we belong. That's a place where I'm a part of something bigger than me, and where we all stick together and where we fill in the gaps when things go wrong. Relationship-rich environments also provide opportunities for dialogue rather than just monologue. It's the two-way radio, not the megaphone. And relationship environments rely on small groups for transformation rather than large groups. And we have built our ministries on large groups in the past 10 years. And that's not where the magic happens. It happens in those small groups. And so we see this gap. Our friends at Awana wrote a book on resilient child discipleship. And I did my dissertation on resilience, so I have a real interest in it. But they talked about resilient disciples belong, believe, and become. All right, they have that sense of belonging, which then leads to what they believe, and we can teach them the Bible, and then they become who God called them to be. And what we see is a gap in those things, right? And sometimes we want to add another word in there in the beginning that starts with the letter B. Does anybody want to guess what that might be? Behave, right? But seriously, we do. We want them to come to us already behaving, to already act like a Christian before we ever are able to disciple them. And the reality is they've got to belong first. And then we can work on their beliefs, and then they can become, because they are swimming, our kids are swimming in the deep end of challenging cultural and developmental questions. And they often view the church as merely splashing around in the shallow end. The three questions that kids are asking are, who am I? And don't we have an identity crisis right now? Where do I fit? And we know that kids will gravitate to a place where they fit, even if it's a terrible place to fit. And then that purpose or that becoming, what difference do I make? So spiritual formation is about belonging, believing, and becoming, or put another way, relationships, repetition, and rituals. And we're struggling in all three of those. We're struggling with the belonging. We're struggling to get them there enough to give them the repetition, to give them what they believe. And then in many cases, the rituals have not been as important, and they're not involved in the large group community, the corporate worship, the body of Christ. They don't have those rituals that we used to have growing up. So belonging is a pain point. We are also isolated. That's a pain point. Now I'm talking about generations. Generationally, we have decided about, 20 years ago maybe, to segregate everybody. And I don't know that it's had I don't know that it's done exactly what we thought it would. Definitely good things have happened. Definitely the Lord uses a lot of different things. But I think the realization is that it's isolated us. It's segregated us. And so there's a gap between what I, as a 54-year-old, know and understand about what a Gen Zer knows and needs to understand, and about how we fit together in a church. There's a gap because we're not around each other. We're not ever seeing each other because I go to this service and you go to that service, and everything is so individualized. And so we're isolated. And there's a tendency, this is a metaphor that Elmore uses, I believe it's Elmore, yes, in his A New Kind of Diversity. And he says we need to quit looking at generations like they're chess or like they're checkers, and start looking at generations like they're chess pieces. So a checker, whatever checker you have does the same, and you think about it the same. And his thought is, when we look at generations like chess pieces, we understand the value of each piece. We know what a pawn is. We know what a king is. We know what a queen is. We know all of those things, and that we utilize those different pieces in unique ways to accomplish a goal, and we can't be isolated. You can't play a chess game with just one type of player. You've got to play it with all of the pieces. So Elmore is really big on word pictures, and I thought that was a fairly effective one. Darwin Glassford said, younger generations have been identified as so radically different by older generations that they are traveling through these milestones alone or with little input and support from previous generations. Westerhoff says, true community necessitates the presence and interaction of at least 3 generations. We've got the generation of memory. Those are our boomers and our traditionalists in the room. You have wisdom. We have the generation of the existential present. That's the reality. That's like me and the Gen X and maybe the millennials, kind of in the trenches, right, with our kids. We understand the reality of what we're facing. And then the generation of vision or passion, which is our Gen Z and our Gen Alpha. And that in true community, you've got to have all 3 of those. You've got to have the wisdom. You've got to have the reality, folks. But you've also got to value and empower that passion. And our Gen Z and our Gen Alpha are going to have and do have passions that will benefit the church and the gospel. Sticky Faith is an old book. It's been out for a long time. I know many of you have read it. But the truth of it will always be true. And they talk about ministry as 5-to-1, about us needing to think or flip the script, to think differently. Most of us in children and preschool ministry, we know our ratios. We know that for bed babies, we want 1 adult for every 2 bed babies. We want 1 adult for every 3 2-year-olds, and et cetera, et cetera. You youth ministers, you can have 1 adult for 50 teenagers, right? It's totally different. But I don't work in teenagers for that reason. But instead of thinking about it that way, what they say is, let's think about it as 5-to-1. What if every one child, every one Gen Z or every one Gen Alpha had 5 adults in the church who knew their name, cared about them, and journeyed in life with them? That would be a greenhouse of spiritual formation. Because Smith and Denton in their book said they found that among conservative Protestant teens, 35% have no adults besides their parents that they can look to. 26 have 1 or 2, 16 have 3 or 4, and only 11%, only 1 out of 10 kids in Protestant teenage ministry type churches have 5 or 6 adults that they can look to that care about them. So that isolation, that going through life without the benefit of each other, without the we, is a huge gap. And so I want you, we're going to take a break from the content for just a minute, and I want you to talk about one of those 3 I think I just did. Which one of those do you think is the most significant for your church, and what ideas do you have to work on that? And or what's one that you wrote down that you would like to talk to? And I want to give you just a few minutes to talk among yourselves. I would love to hear from some of you all about what you're thinking. Could be your own gap that you are identifying and wanting to work on, or it could be one of those 2 or 3 that we just worked on. But I think it's good for us to hear from each other. What are you thinking? What are you thinking about the gaps, and how do you think about trying to mind some of those gaps? Retire. What's that? Retire. Oh, yeah, I hope to do that someday. Can't give up.
I think understanding that, as you were discussing there, the 5 kids to 1 adult or whatever, if we can do the smaller groups with the children, they are special. It may take years to see the results, but I think it will be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you want them to think they're special,
Yes.
and you also want them to think they're a part of something special. So that's that we component.
But also a full believer in, we have a generation that have not been disciplined.
Yeah.
And if we hold our ground to discipline, I think they will appreciate it more.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole other conference, isn't it?
Yes.
Good word. Okay, somebody else. What's a gap, and what's a way that you think, or maybe it's a gap that you're already addressing in your church, and you know we could benefit from it? Yes, sir.
I believe there's a big gap with how we treat children. A lot of times we treat them as they're inferior in intellect sometimes. And so what we'll do is, and maybe some churches here will be able to agree, is you separate them into junior church or a kids church, and they never get the chance to be in what we call big church, right? And so for us in our church, we did away with that. We still have a small kids church up to a certain age, but when they get to a certain ability, a level, we want them in with the family to be able to actually sit, hear good sound preaching, teaching, because that's where the problem comes between 18 and 25. Right. When we separate the kids from big church, guess what? When they go off, they don't know how to be a part of big church. Right. And we lose them. Yep. And so it's so important for us to be able to integrate them in from the get-go, from day zero, they come out the womb, and to integrate them into church.
You're speaking my language,
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and I think there's a value in age segregation events, so don't hear me say that. But I think we've overvalued that. We've segregated it so much, and so there's lots of compromises that church. If you're in a church that says, man, we are always going to have children's church, well, then you've got to figure out ways to get them with the body of Christ, because what I tell students is if your kids are never with the body, that's a problem. You can figure out how to solve it. There's lots of different ways. I personally like what you're saying. That's my personal preference, but I also know God's using other models. But I do think that our kids have to learn the language of the faith. They have to learn that they're a part of something bigger. They have to see baptisms. If you want to giggle a little bit, Google Paw Paw Patrol gets baptized. Okay, has anybody seen that? Yeah, so it's this little 4-year-old boy that's got a robe on and his boots on, and he tells his mom, I'm going to do a baptism. And she follows him upstairs, and he gets in the water with his boots like a preacher does, and he has this toy, and she says, why are you going to baptize him? And he said, because he needs the Holy Ghost, you know? And I baptize you. Now, I know I'm not trying to be sacrilegious at all. But what the value is, that's how he's learned. He's watched. This is their play, right? Amen. So if you don't think kids don't learn anything, go watch Paw Paw Patrol get baptized. Because this little boy, and they had him on a TV show, and his dad's a pastor. And the little boy said, I want to be just like my daddy, right? And so it adds to that value of our kids. And I do think when I was growing up, I didn't have children's church. And when I went off to college, I wanted to find a church because I wanted to have what I had at my church. And I don't think kids want that because they don't really know what they had before. So good example. I think you're preaching a lot of people's language with that. And I think even with the younger generation, they're more open to that. I think the pendulum is swinging back to, no, we want our kids with us in worship. So good point. Somebody else. Okay.
And the gap is that if you ask a younger person, what does it mean to be a faithful church member, faithful church attender? If I come on Sunday morning, every Sunday morning, I'm faithful. But you ask an older church member, unless you're there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, then you're faithful. And there's a gap.
Right.
What does it mean to be a faithful church member?
Okay.
And then when it's, I think for us in our church, where this comes to a rub is leadership. And if somebody's very faithful to come on Sunday morning, you put them in leadership, and if so, then the expectation is, well, maybe they should come even more regularly, because they're in leadership.
Right.
But you already put them there.
Right.
So
there is a disconnect, right? And that's why we can't staff our preschool and children's ministry very well, because faithfulness to them is serving once a month. Mm-hmm. Right? And our traditionalists and some of our boomers, you guys serve every week. I serve every week because that's how you get to know kids. And so I think there is a gap. What does faithfulness look like? And maybe they haven't been able to witness what that is. They don't know exactly what that is. So good. What's another one? Another gap.
I look at it from this. We have separated everybody. Our church has separated everybody. Children at one end of the church. Youth have their own sanctuary. They do their small groups in their sanctuary. Yeah. And then the adults are in a completely different section. We're all isolated from each other, and we don't know each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't have contact with. They don't come past the youth don't come past their sanctuary. Mm-hmm. They don't go into the rest of the church.
Yeah.
Wow. It's really
that's a big gap.
It's a big gap.
It's a big gap, and it's not something that you can just solve, but it is something that you can be aware of and that we can begin to think about. It's that pendulum swing, right? All that was well intentioned, because we want to provide the best for our kids and we want to have the best facilities and all those types of things, but we've robbed them of the intergenerational relationship. Good. Somebody else. How are some of you all getting intergenerational relationships working? What are those simple little things that you're doing that everybody here needs to hear that's working?
Our student pastor did this, it's not me, it's his idea. But he does a summer bowling day where they rent out the whole bowling alley, and we're a good sized church, so we have 3 services and so forth, so we don't all get to know each other. And he invites anybody 50 and up to sign up for the bowling day, as well as all of his students. So he'll have about 200 there. He divides them into teams. Every team has 2 adults and 2 students, and they get to know each other that way. And so that's been a lot of fun because they see each other at church now.
Yeah.
And then another thing is when they go to camps, when the students go to camp and when they go to their winter retreat, they have name bands for people to pick up to be prayer partners. And someone can go out in our foyer, an adult, and pick up a prayer card for that particular child or that particular student and pray for them all week. When they get back, they have a share time on a Wednesday night, and all of those adults are invited to meet the person they've been praying for.
Great.
So that's just, our student minister does that, and I think it does help to build more community in our church.
Good. Simple idea. That's powerful. Connects the generations. Yes, sir.
They work side by side in every ministry that we have. Some of my favorite memories is watching my teenage sons eating meals with the grumpy old men over there, right? That, and then when our senior adults go on their mission trip, our students will write them notes and vice versa back to students. I wish we had so much more multi-gen stuff, but in missions right now, there's some good things happening.
That's awesome. Those are simple ideas that don't cost a lot of money. Did you have your hand up back there? You're just stretching. You're tired? Okay.
One of the things that, because I regularly and some other things when I'm still at my church, and my church still does this, is you could show up on a Sunday and you're going to see 15, 16-year-olds on stage as part of the worship team. They're going to be greeting with senior adults on Sunday morning and across the board serving.
Great.
And I know there are headaches to that, but at the same time, the relationships that form across generations as a result of serving the Lord together and serving the church has been monumental and is still monumental in our lives.
So it takes some time and organization, but doesn't cost anything.
One thing we've recently done in the past year, so we're almost 1 year in, is we went from a monthly business meeting on Wednesday nights that nobody attended to a quarterly Sunday night. We no longer call it a business meeting, but just a celebration. We call it a ministry celebration. And we invite students, kids, families back. We do a meal after, but it's a worship service instead of a business meeting. There's formality to it. We still do church business. But, my kids have been in church since 9 months before they were born, kind of thing. And my kids had never sat through a church business meeting. Yeah. They'd never seen how discussions were held and how deliberations were done on certain matters. And so we've not had anything contentious yet, which is good for the year. But at some point, kids will be exposed now. That's our hope anyways. That's our goal, is to expose some of our younger families, even the 20s and younger 30s folks who never went to a business meeting, but they've been a part of the church for a long time, and give them the opportunity to see how things function, to voice and within the rules of order that we follow. And so we hope to see fruit from that. So I'll let y'all know in a little bit.
Yeah. Great. I mean, that's a whole other thing that our kids have never experienced is business meetings, which really leads to one of the last ones, and we'll keep talking, but generosity and giving, there's a gap, right? That's a huge gap for most churches, and some of the folks have made these statements that I've been reading about, but that traditionalists give to programs, they're your loyal givers. Boomers give to productivity. In general, broad brush strokes. Gen X gives to people. Millennials give to a passion. And we're not sure yet what Gen Z or Gen Alpha gives to. But I think there's a big gap in understanding the cooperative program and understanding how we work together with our money. And I think that's a coming slap in the face to us when we're completely dependent upon Gen X down to Gen Z for our offerings and things like that. And so one of the ways to address the gap is what he just said, is to involve students in knowing this is how we do business. This is what our money goes for. This is why we give. Stewardship is a big deal. But I think that's a huge gap, and I think that is one of those things that when you don't have them in church, they don't see. I grew up seeing my dad put something in the offering every Sunday. So to me, that was just normal, right? But if I hadn't grown up that way, I don't know that I would have thought that was normal. So there's some nuances, there's some things that we have to think about. I want to, anybody else want to say something before we start to wind down even more? Yes.
Maybe kind of like a question.
Okay.
Group question. You all know Satan is a master liar. And, but there's one thing that he has not lied about. If I was looking to define a term as the most honest term you could imagine, I would pick this word, and it's influencers. When it comes to the world of social media, what is controlling who our children become are influencers. And it's not like a hidden word. If I was looking for a word to describe exactly what these people do in the lives of young people and even adults, that would have been the term I would have preached from the pulpit. You know what these people actually are? They're influencers. They're literally controlling how you see life. They're setting the paradigms of what you think is important, the very why of your life, everything you should do about life is being set by influencers. And one of these gigantic gaps is, and if you study like social sciences, the great minds of the past will pretty much tell you watch a culture and who they begin to define as their heroes. Kind of like you said about the music, there's certain cultural indicators about art that tell you the mindset of the generation and what they're thinking and where they're going. The moment a culture begins to have the wrong kind of heroes, that's generally whoever the younger kids' heroes are, that's what you're going to have come to pass shortly. And in generations past, you look at what America used to consider heroes or people you looked up to, so-called what they call influencers now. Some of it for us older people, it was our grandparents. Because and that was the way it was generationally for a long time, because your granddaddy was the one that knew more about how to navigate life than anybody else you knew. Nowadays, in the Gap instance, granddad don't know squat. Right? I want to go look at somebody that can show me how to get 1 million views making videos. You know what I mean? I'm going to an influencer. And we have literally had the most gigantic gap now between who our kids are being influenced by. How do we regather? Because who they're following will determine who they become. And how do we become the influence? That's what we're really asking ourselves. Right. Even if we can't take phones out, okay, let's just say social media is not going anywhere. But how can I put myself or the church in place of who they're following now? Right. How do we become the influences of our children?
That is a heart-pounding question right there. And the gentleman behind you, I know, has something to say. He's raised his hand.
But we talked a lot today about how the church is struggling. We talked a lot today about where there's gaps. But the gates of hell will not prevail.
Amen.
Church might not look like what it's looked like for the past 50 years. It might be a little different. But the church will not fall. All nations, all tribes, all tongues will stand before the throne and sing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. So we're not fighting a losing battle. We're fighting a battle that's already been won. So do everything for the glory of God, and He will continue to prevail His name.
Amen. We live in that tension of knowing what we face, but knowing the battle's already been won. Good word. Thank you for sharing that.
Actually, give some encouragement too. I have 2 15-year-old boys I mentioned, and my parents are really involved in their lives, and they really do look up to them. And I think what we're going to see is once these younger generations are failed by the influencers, because inevitably we know how they're going to feel after following someone who's given them empty advice. I think that's where maybe if we have been involved in their lives, that they'll come back to that wisdom of, well, maybe this didn't work, so maybe I should try what my friend at church was talking about. You know, we are always trying to bring friends to church of my kids.
Right.
And so I'm just hopeful that maybe when they see these influencers don't help their lives, that they'll come back to God and faith, and even the older generations who have that wisdom.
It's definitely not hopeless, and I'm thankful that you brought that up and that you've also brought that up.
I think too, like, there's a lot involved here, but we got to remember one simple thing. We got to preach the gospel.
Amen.
There's power in the gospel. We can't change these kids. There is only one thing in this world that can change these kids. That's the power of the gospel, the story of Jesus Christ, repentance, forgiveness. And I was one of those people years ago that in one night, at one point in time, February 3rd, 1991, that my life completely changed. And that's really it. This road that we're on is narrow. We've got to continue to preach the gospel, get the message out, and we can't sugarcoat it. And so that's the only thing that's going to bring these kids in and change their lives when we get that to it.
Absolutely. The Holy Spirit at work. Last comment, and then we'll wrap up.
I'd like to just share with Shelly that I know just a little encouragement. A couple of weeks ago, my son, well, a couple of months ago, it started off, my youngest son told us that he felt the real strong need to get back to church. You know, train them up in the way they should go and then part. You hang on to every word, knowing that God's going to prevail because he keeps his promise. So he did that. He started going to church by himself, did this for a couple of different months. And he said, I'm going to have to lead by example. So he starts leading by example. He leads his wife to church. She starts going. She is tremendously moved. And just a couple of weeks ago, she became a Christian.
Amen.
She gave her life to the Lord because of his example. And I told him, I said, son, that is the most powerful thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
Thank you for making it a reality.
Yeah. God at work.
Encourage that we got to lead by example. I mean, we're the only Jesus some people are going to see.
That's right.
You know, whether they're relatives or not.
Amen.
Thank you.
I see one hand, then we'll stop.
This is a question rather than a comment. What do we do if we come to the point where we do not have institutions to lean on? We may be heading that way.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think we have the decentralization of discipleship already, right? And so definitely, I think that could be an issue that our kids get faced with. It's not going to get any easier. Institutions are probably not going to get any stronger, and particularly the church. I'd like to end in a different way than I had planned, but I would like for you just to get with the person that you've been talking with the most, and I would like for you to just pray with each other and just ask the Lord to reveal to you ways in which you could take steps towards sharing the gospel, letting the gospel be what leads kids to the Lord, to pray together. There's something special that happens when we pray together individually. And so I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to pray. Pray for whatever it is that the Lord's been teaching you or whatever you want him to help you know how to do next, or a specific Gen Zer, or maybe it's one of your kids that's away and that you're praying for their salvation. I'm going to let you pray for just a couple of minutes, and I'm going to close us out in prayer. Thank you. You know our hearts. You know the children and the teenagers and the families that you have placed in our path, Lord, that are on the trail with us. You know their needs. And Lord, I pray that you would help me as I deal with my own 3 kids and as I deal with kindergartners and as I deal with college students. Lord, I pray that you would renew in me the why of why I do what I do, and that's to point them to you. Lord, I thank you that we're never hopeless. Lord, that your word, as many have said, is what is powerful, that the gospel is powerful. That's what changed lives. And so, Lord, I pray that we wouldn't become weary in doing good. It's hard sometimes not to get discouraged when we don't have the resources, or maybe we're just struggling. And so, Lord, I just pray that for each person in this room that you would have spoken something encouraging into their heart, and that you would also speak a challenge into their heart of a way that they can think differently about how to minister to this generation, to this next generation. And we pray that we would get to see a move that can only be explained by you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.